Fujisaki Yuto stood right in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by a crowd of people all bundled up for the cold. At 20 years old, Yuto's life isn't. Standing all alone, he clutched his head in total panic, thinking he'd failed to enroll again. But then he looked up and saw a bright, cheerful logo right above the glass doors. Kirito walked into the shop still clutching his head, but after pushing up his glasses, he realized he just hadn't tried hard enough and promised himself he'd pass everything next year. He looks up and spots a guy with a weapon at the register threatening the cashier, and he realizes it's a straight-up robbery. Yuto started breaking into a cold sweat. He realized right then that this guy was definitely a robber. A dude wearing a medical mask started screaming at the cashier to hand over all the cash. This guy with a knife starts screaming like a total psycho, making the girl freeze in terror as she clutches her face and starts to cry. This guy was clutching a knife and glaring like a total psycho. Yuto grabbed a mop and whacked the thief as hard as he could. The dude dropped his blade in pain and actually started. The thief clutched his hand in total pain, and without even thinking, the cashier girl grabbed a massive spoon from the display and chucked it forward while squeezing her eyes shut and crying her. That massive spoon the girl tossed smacks the thief right in the face. Then Yuto slams the guy's back with another heavy hit, and the thief's eyes start rolling back. The thief slammed onto the ground with his knife right beside him, while Uto and the girl just stood there frozen next to a busted mop. Yuto is totally drenched in sweat and gasping for air as he stares at the girl behind the counter who isn't even moving a muscle. After a bit, she finally cracked a smile through all the sweat and told Yukito she was super thankful for his help. A blinding light flashes in Yukanto's eyes, the cashier girl starts vanishing into thin air, and then everything just fades to black. Yukarito's eyes snapped open to find himself completely alone, and as he stared up at the sky, he wondered if he'd actually ended up in paradise. Yukito is trapped in a tiny cage floating way up in the air, and the second he feels someone standing behind him, he whips around to face them. A bald guy pops up right behind Yukato with a grin, then starts screaming that Yukato finally arrived, but first, he needs to apologize. Yushito nervously fixed his glasses and told the guy he was totally confused about why he was even apologizing, while the man just stood there hunched over right in front of him. The guy shut his eyes and looked down, telling the three of them he'd just cast a spell that was basically a death sentence. Uto stared at the man in total shock, watching his hands drop low as he tried to figure out who this guy even was. The guy looked up and announced he was actually a demigod. They were trapped in a border world, just one step away from paradise. But his master plan? Yeah, that was... A bunch of other islands were just drifting in the sky, and while the man kept trekking along in his leggings, Yukato made sure to watch his every move. The guy starts walking away with a heavy sigh, telling Yukuoto he's seriously sorry for everything. But Yukuoto just starts screaming, asking what's gonna happen to him now. This old guy with a super wrinkly face just smiled at Uto and promised to use his power to make sure he was reborn. The guy looks at Yukito and drops the bomb that he can't actually send him back home. Yukito is going to be stuck in a world ruled by some other man instead. Since the guy, Yugurto asked what his future world would be like, so the man gestured to a squad of witches and archers, while Maju-chun announced he was heading into a fantasy land of swords. Yusto started picturing terrifying beasts the moment a weird guy told him the world was now crawling with magic monsters and death traps. This mysterious guy turns to Yukolato and, even though he can't do much, he offers to hook him up with some epic skills while his clothes flap wildly in the wind. The man turns toward Yukonato, who clenches his fists and asks if he can ask a few questions, and the guy gives him the green light. The guy and Yuto start debating who he should be reborn as, deciding he'll just be a normal dude with some magic. But as the man stops to think, Yuto looks totally freaked out. He raises a finger and glowing symbols pop up around him as he smirks, explaining that there are 4 main elements: fire, water, wind, and earth, plus some crazy combined magic. The guy suddenly points right at Yukato and says he can expose his status, making Yukato raise his hand in total fear. Yukito reached down and repeated the words about his status just like the guy told him. Suddenly, a screen popped up right in front of his face. Yukito just stood there completely frozen. A status screen popped up in front of Yugukito, with almost every stat sitting at 0. And the man explained this was how he'd learn about his new powers. The guy stood right behind Yukaniato, scratching his chin and teasing that he already had a rank before even getting a power-up, leaving Yukaniato totally stunned. The guy reaches out to Yuto, telling him they're running out of time and asking what kind of power he wants, while Yuto just stares back and really thinks about it. Yuto balled up his fist, pressed his hand to his chest, and screamed for a power that rewarded his hard work, all while standing in a massive sky filled with drifting clouds. The guy scowled at Uto in total shock, telling him this skill was way more than he could handle, but Uto just stood his ground without moving a muscle. Uto is still standing there, yelling that even though the skill is basic, his trash luck means his stats might not even go up when he levels. Yusto stood there with his hands down while the guy thought it over. But then the man suddenly picked him up and promised to give him a legendary 8-talent skill. Yukito and this guy show off 2 people who are at the exact same level. The man explains that even though leveling up takes way more work, you actually earn experience 3 times faster than usual. The guys introduce 2 more people while the man explains that Uto's power is totally broken. Every time he levels up, every single one of his stats goes up by a point, which is something a normal person could never do. Yukarato's face turned beet red as he screamed that he could climb way faster than anyone else, demanding the power for himself right as his eyes started glowing with a strange light. His eyes totally changed as a crazy symbol appeared in his pupil. He explained that he was giving him the gift of clairvoyance. This power lets him size up anyone, scan objects, and even sense. Yuka finally cooled off and asked the guy what was going to happen to him now that demigods were in the picture, all while light clouds drifted through the sky behind him. The guy stood right in front of Utah and told him he was going to remake him, which meant his current life was officially over. Utah stayed totally chill while the guy claimed his clones would finish off the others, but those copies were only half as strong as the original. The guy grabbed Yukatos by the shoulders and told him the other 2 were only getting a tiny bit of power. The guy grabbed Yuto's shoulders with a grin, telling him he trusted his clones and their time was up, and even as a blinding light started to glow, Yuto kept his eyes locked right on him. A light flicks on in a second-story window. This guy is holding a cursed baby that's screaming its head off. Suddenly, a table just spawns out of nowhere right next to the... Mars was just sitting there in a deep crater with a totally bald head. As he started crawling around, bright blonde hair suddenly began to sprout. Before long, Mars grew up and finally took his first. Mars explored the world with a huge grin, grinding his mana from 0 all the way to the max by checking out flowers, trees, and even random house stuff that all had a good status. Blonde-haired Mars is zooming around a wooden table where 2 adults and a kid are sitting, right past the bread basket and a massive stone stove in the room. Holding some bread with a grin, the guy says Mars is super chill, but Mars uses his clairvoyance to find out his name is Zeke Bryant, a total pro who uses a sword and crazy earth magic. She laughed while holding her bread, saying that hanging out with Ike was actually doing him some good, and this girl is Maria Bryant, a total beast with a sword and water magic. While munching on bread, this dark-haired kid named I.E. Bryant says Mars is totally awesome, and he's actually a triple threat with a sword, a spear, and fire magic as he sits. Little blonde Mars was just chilling in a tiny kid's chair. One of his parents handed him a ball of food to eat. Mars squeezed his fists together with a huge grin on his face. Mars was passed out cold with his mouth hanging open, totally wiped out after burning through every last drop of his mana. Mars was wide awake now, and as he traced the patterns on the table, he realized his magic power had totally spiked while he was asleep. The stat window vanished, and as Mars checked out his hand, he realized he was finally about to use magic while staring up at the wooden floorboards above him. Mars kept his hand raised high, flashed a smirk, and shouted, "Thunder!" with total confidence in his voice and eyes. Nothing happened next, so Mars just stood there with his hand up, smirking because he thought he had it all figured out until he realized he couldn't use his magic anymore. Mars just lay there on his bed, tucking his limbs in and closing his eyes, knowing he had to master magic as fast as possible. Mars was chilling at the dinner table with his family under some dim candlelight. Everyone started stuffing their faces, but Mars didn't touch a single bite. After thinking for a second, he flashed a grin. Mars' parents looked totally freaked out when he asked them to explain magic, but his brother just stared at him while munching on a bread roll. Maria leaned in with a super awkward smile, asking why Yukarito was even bringing that stuff up. But Mars just grinned and said if he's actually got the talent, he wants to start learning. Mars blushed like crazy as he grinned at Maria and told her she should totally teach him healing magic, while Unita stood there with his blonde hair sticking out in every direction. Maria nervously touched her face and asked why Mars even needed healing magic, looking totally put together with her neat hair and that dark ribbon around her neck. Mars's parents' jaws dropped and they jumped out of their chairs when he told them his dream was to heal their wounds. Maria shakes her head and whispers to Zeke that they've got to see if Mars can actually use magic. It was way better to figure out his powers now rather than later. While they talked, Zeke clasped his hands and looked down. Then Maria told the boys to hit the hay because she and Zeke had some serious stuff to talk about. And the kids actually listened and did exactly what they... Ike and Mars were just chilling outside when Mars suddenly ate his parents with a massive smile, And then Zeke announced that he and his mom were finally going to teach the kids magic like they talked about. Zeke stepped up to the group with his hands on his belt, telling Mars he had to make a promise first while Maria stood behind him with a smirk. Standing by a stone wall right outside their house, Zeke explained that sacred magic is super rare and can basically heal any injury or sickness. Zeke leaned in with a super serious face and told Mars that he and his mom think it's way better to keep his magic a secret, making Mars break out in a cold sweat. Zeke grabbed Mars by the shoulders and gave him a creepy grin, asking if he really got the plan, and after a second, Mars's face turned bright red as he smiled back and told his clouds are drifting by as the squad sits down and shuts their eyes. Zeke tells them to focus all their energy right below the belly button, because that's where the magic power builds up. The guys just sat there on the ground looking more and more stressed by the second. Zeke told them to picture the energy flowing all through their bodies. That's how they'd finally know if they... Magic power started swirling in the guy's gut and sent waves through his whole body, and now that Mars could finally feel it, he just had to get that energy moving. Mars squeezed his eyes shut and gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face as he focused everything on making his magic flow through his body just like blood. Magic energy starts swirling all around the boys. Their parents are totally shocked that they both actually handled it. Now they have to figure out what kind of powers they're packing. Aika was blushing like crazy and felt totally blessed when his stats revealed he could use a sword, a spear, and fire magic, leaving his parents completely shocked that their son was a total prodigy destined to be a knight. Mars finally shows his face, just smiling and scratching his head, but his parents are totally shaking because his power level is 5 times higher than both of theirs. This kid is a straight-up genius. The next morning, the sun was shining bright over the Mars house as Zeke pulled out 2 books and told everyone he'd scored a grimoire, while Mars chilled on Maria's lap. The group hits the street, and Mars steps up in front of the family to start casting, closing his eyes and reaching out his hand as he focuses his power into his fingertips to shout the word, wind. Mars snaps his eyes open and calls out to the wind with total confidence. A split second later, a massive gust of air blasts straight from his palm. His parents and brother are standing there with their... Maria pulls Mars into a massive hug, and soon the whole family is piling on to hype up his insane skills. As the sun started to set, Mars's family just kept hyping him up. A few days later, Ike finally figured out fire magic too. Marie was so excited she gave Ike a whole year flies by, and the guys are standing at the edge of the forest near the house with their eyes shut in total silence, while mountains and a dusty sky loom behind them. Mars and Ike stood perfectly still with their eyes shut and faces totally calm, taking deep breaths to lock in their focus. Mars held his hands out to summon a weapon and immediately started unleashing his attacks. Ike pulled his hand back to charge up his magic, then thrust it forward as a massive pillar of fire blasted out. The guys are sweating bullets as Mars raises his hand and Ike grips a stick, when suddenly, glowing stat windows pop up right in front of them. The kids looked up and saw their parents standing right by the stone wall, so Marie started waving like crazy and shouting that they were finally back. Right then, the kids bolted over to meet their parents. They were screaming with joy, so hyped to see them finally back. Zeke was clutching a stick in one hand and a bag in the other. Zeke flashed a grin and told the boys he brought something super cool for them. He promised he'd show it to everyone in just a little bit. Maria stood right beside him, hiding her own. The whole family was hanging out inside the house. The kids and their parents were all sitting around a wooden table together. Right in front of Zeke, there was a bag sitting on the table. Zeke pulled a sword with a super weird design out of his bag, and while wearing gloves, he told everyone this was the big reveal he wanted to show them. Mars triggered his skill and the sword's stats popped up, revealing it was the Fire Spirit sword, and he knew that just holding it would crank his magic power to the max. Zeke hands the sword over and tells Ike it's officially his, making Ike's face turn bright red as he starts thanking his dad for the awesome gift. Zeke reaches into his bag and hands a book to Mars, telling him to study it carefully, but Mars shouts in shock when he sees it's actually just a beginner's guide to the grim war of sacred magic. Mars grabbed the book and pumped his fist with a huge grin, shouting a massive thanks to his dad for the gift, and even when the sun went down and the world went quiet, Mars stared at his hand, remembering how he totally failed at healing yesterday, while Ike kept training with his sword right next to him. Mars shut his eyes and kept his hand out, focusing hard on the healing spell and telling himself he absolutely had this. Mars locks in as a wild magical aura starts glowing around him. He keeps focusing on his recovery magic until a ball of energy sparks in his hand, and he finally pulls off the healing spell. Mars turned to his brother with a massive grin, shouting that he finally pulled off a healing spell, and Ike was totally blown away. Mars walked up to his brother to explain why he wasn't using the salamander sword, leaving Ike totally shocked as he rested his own blade on his shoulder. Drenched in sweat from training, Ike flashed his brother a grin and explained that his dad wants him to nail the basics first, which is why he's using a different sword. Mars just grinned at his brother and said he totally got it. Their dad was being way too intense. Ike just rested his sword on his shoulder and started laughing like crazy. The guys whipped around when they heard their names, and their faces instantly froze in total terror. Their parents called out to the kids. They started heading straight for the house. The parents were looking rough, covered in bruises from head to toe. Maria grabbed Zeke's hand to help him limp along. The terrified kids rushed over to their hurt parents, yelling that they were going to be okay, as they all stopped by a stone fence on the path back home. His parents were actually smiling while they joked about getting jumped by the monster, even asking for towels. But Mars told them to knock it off once he saw his dad was hurt way worse than his mom. Mars held out his hands and got super focused, leaving Zeke totally confused about what he was doing, until Mars finally activated his healing magic. A bright light suddenly glows in front of Zeke's face, and his wounds slowly start to close up. Mars wipes his hand across his forehead, looking totally exhausted and covered in sweat. Maria and Zeke's jaws hit the floor. They checked their bodies and started worshipping him right then and there. Thanks to Mars's crazy healing magic, all their injuries were just gone. Mars stood right in front of his parents with a massive grin and his eyes shut tight, telling them he'd managed to heal every single wound. Maria and Zeke clutched their faces in shock as Zeke dropped his staff, telling them that thanks to Mars they were finally safe, while the kids just stood there in front of their parents completely speechless. Maria rushes over and gives Mars a massive hug, shouting that she's so thankful he already learned healing magic, while a blushing Mars just smiles and hugs her right back. Maria and Mars shared a long hug with huge smiles on their faces. Ike was right there laughing his head off, and Zeke just watched from the side with a totally blank expression. Night fell and the fire was roaring as the whole family gathered around the table with their hot drinks, and Zeke finally called a meeting to talk about their future. Zeke got dead serious and told the guys they finally had to tell his mom the truth about their life as adventurers who raid dungeons and hunt down monsters. Zeke grabbed his drink and explained that the local count once ordered him to head into a dungeon and take out a monster. The kids sat right across from their parents, hanging on every word of their dad's story. Zeke slammed his mug on the table and told them all about his and his mom's trip too. The boys leaned in across the table to hear their dad, and Zeke told them they could help him and mom with work in a year. But he's waiting for them to grow up before making the final call. Fire roared in the fireplace as the boys smiled and agreed with their dad, but then Zeke jumped in to tell them he had even more news to share. Zeke leaned over the table with a huge grin and told the guys they were getting a new sibling, while Maria blushed and held his arm as the night turned pitch black outside. Mars gripped the table, his face turning bright red from the shock of his dad's news, while Ike sat right next to him, clenching his fists with a massive, hyped-up grin. A whole year flies by, and while a big green tree grows next to Mars' house, the guys are already outside with their swords out, ready to go at it. A second later, they both charge at each other, and Mars uses his wind powers to kick his speed into overdrive. The two stepped up and started trading some insane blows. Mars was totally locked in. He lunged at Ike with his sword, but Ike didn't flinch and swung right back at his brother. Finally, the brothers slammed their swords together. They looked at each other and grinned, totally ready for what was coming next. Suddenly, weird glowing energy started sparking up all around them. Mars and I are still throwing hands with big grins on our faces, and as he looks back on the crazy year they've had, he realizes that even though the guy's stats went up a bit, Ike was swinging around a literal flaming sword while his parents and Mars watched in total awe. But just as Mars thought the magic training was the main event, the door swung open and something way bigger started going down. The big moment finally arrived when Mars and Ike's little sister was born, and after Mars used his skill, he saw her name was Lena, and she actually had both water and earth magic. The whole family crowded around Lena's crib to see her, all of them wearing massive smiles and looking at her with so much love. When Lena started reaching her tiny hands out to them, a bit later, the whole family sat down for dinner together. The fireplace was totally cold, without even a spark. Everyone had a drink waiting for them at their spot. Zeke spoke up, mentioning that Zeke leaned over the table and announced they'd all be exploring together starting tomorrow. And while Ike was totally down with his dad's plan, Maria just couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The guys were shaking in fear, but their mom told them that if they took Mars along to heal their wounds, every battle would be a total breeze with him around. Maria jumped up and leaned over the table, screaming that Mars was only 3 years old and she was totally freaking out about it. Maria leaned over the table and kept shouting that even if Mars is a total prodigy, he's way too young for these crazy fights, while Zeke and the boys just listened in dead silence. Marie plopped back into her chair and stared at her mug, telling Ike he's not ready for a real fight yet, and even though she wants to go herself, she's stuck babysitting. Marie thinks it over for a second, then looks at Mars and tells him exactly what's on her mind. Zeke and I just stare at the two of them, totally caught up in the moment. Mars told Zeke he really wanted to go with his dad and Ike, but he also got his mom's point, while Maria clutched her mug and looked at her youngest son with. Mars grinned when his mom said they should all stick together and stay away from places overflowing with magic, while Ike just looked at her with a big smile. Maria held up a finger with a dead serious look, telling the guys they're too young to use the gear, but they still better be ready for whatever goes down. A cupboard full of dishes sat in the corner of the room. Maria kept warning the kids about the danger and telling them exactly what to pack. Zeke looked at his wife in shock when Clouds drifted over Mars's house as the guys hit the street, with Maria wishing them luck while Zeke packed his staff, Ike strapped on his sword, and Mars said one last goodbye to his mom. The crew ended up right outside the guild, and as Mars and I looked around, we saw a massive crowd gathered under the building's giant signs and official guild crests. Mars watched a man and woman laughing and realized he'd never seen other kids before. Then his eyes shifted as he fired up his clairvoyance. The guy waves and says something that makes the girl crack up. Right next to them, there are boards showing off everyone's power levels. Mars looks at the stats and wonders if Zeke walked up with a grin and said he was sorry for keeping them waiting. He signed up for the mission to go hunt some monsters. Huge skyscrapers were everywhere in this city. The crew followed Zeke. The wind rustled through a massive tree, sending leaves scattering all over the ground. The crew eventually came face to face with a giant, endless wall. 2 knights were posted up right at the gate flew open and the guys charged ahead in total excitement. But Zeke just took his time, keeping a super close eye on his kids. The guy stops right in the middle of the road while Ike stands there with a sword strapped to his back. Zeke starts walking straight toward them. The wind kicks up, swirling dust and leaves all. Zeke and the crew looked out over the rolling hills where the road stretched ahead. The path led right toward a thick forest and some massive mountains. A strong breeze swept down the trail, swirling leaves. Zeke rested his hand on his belt and gripped his staff, smirking as he told them he didn't expect them to reach this place so fast. Mars whipped his head toward the bushes in shock as a terrifying noise started coming from right next to where the group was standing. Mars popped his power to track that sound, and he was totally shocked to see a bunch of monsters hiding in the bushes and laughing their heads off. A bunch of monsters were hiding right there in the bushes. They were all decked out in these gross, dirty rags. The creatures were just staring at each other and laughing like crazy. Mars totally freaked. The monsters are shaking in their boots after Zeke makes a creepy sound. Then the goblins lose it and charge at the guys in a total rage. Zeke tells me and Ike to watch closely because the monsters came charging right at them, so Zeke told his sons he'd blast them with fire but to keep their swords ready just in case, as he held out his hand and started charging up his magic. Zeke grabbed his staff and pointed it straight ahead, firing off a spell that sent rocks zooming at the monsters, with some smashing into them while others flew wide. 2 monsters are down but one is still totally fine, so Zeke ducks behind Ike and tells him he's gotta attack, while Ike puts his hands out to start charging his magic as the monster grins. This monster suddenly pops up right in front of Ike. Ike holds his hands out and blasts it with fire the moment it gets close. There's a huge bang and a bright flash that leaves the beast slams into the dirt, totally swallowed by fire. It starts screaming and thrashing its limbs around like a maniac. Zeke just watches the whole thing with a smirk, telling Ike he did The fire finally died out, leaving nothing but a pile of smoking black ash where the monster once stood. Zeke started creeping toward the monster's remains. The boys stayed put, eyes glued to. Zeke walks over to the monster's remains, brushes away the coals to find a tiny crystal, and reminds us that you always have to grab the magic stone after a big win. Zeke grabbed the stone and explained that they just had to take it to the guild to get paid for it. The monster's remains started flaring up again, so Zeke gripped his staff and said they had to burn every last bit, because if these things turned into undead, they'd be in huge trouble. The flames finally died out, leaving absolutely nothing left of that monster but a pile of ash for the crew to stare at. So Zeke slung his bag over his shoulder and told everyone the job was done. Mars's face turned bright red as he grinned at his dad, telling him he wanted to blast the next monster they found with his own magic. Zeke gripped his staff and flashed a smirk at Mars, telling him that wind magic is useless against these monsters, so he's basically out of the fight. Mars closed his eyes with a huge grin and told them he doesn't just use the wind, He fights with sharp wind blades while rocking a jacket and shirt. Zeke's face completely drops as he starts sweating bullets, screaming in total shock that Mars has already mastered wind blades while he just stands there in his gloves and button-down jacket. Mars flashed a grin and told his dad he learned wind blades just by messing around with different wind tricks, all while a tiny tuft of hair poked up from his head. Zeke gave a nervous grin, clutching his staff and bag as he told his son they should try hunting the monsters from Mars, and Mars just smiled right back at his dad. The guys suddenly landed in a whole new area, but Zeke let out another weird noise that caught a bunch of goblins' attention. The monsters came charging right at them, so Mars held out his... Mars scowled as the beasts closed in, and one of them actually started grinning while it raised its sharp claws. He gripped his sword, ready to take them down, just waiting for the perfect moment. Mars's hand starts glowing while Ike stands behind him with his sword ready and Zeke cheers them on. Then Mars fires a wind blade that slices a monster's head clean off. Zeke flashed a wicked grin and blasted one monster with his magic staff, while Ike gripped his sword and charged right at the other one to land a heavy hit. Zeke fired up his powers and the monsters started to go up in flames. Mars grabbed a crystal from one of the fallen beasts. Zeke patted his sons on the head and told them they didn't. Deep in the forest, the sounds of a brutal fight echoed through the trees. Mars thrust his hand out to cast a spell, looking completely locked in. Ike looked totally ticked off as he gripped. Ike aimed his blade right at the monster lying there with its eyes shut. He held out his hand and blasted the beast with a fire spell. Mars was standing right there close by. But Ike stared at his hands in shock as he realized he'd leveled up, and suddenly a glowing screen popped up showing his boosted stats while the fire kept blazing around him. Zeke stood back with his staff and a huge grin, telling the guys they did an amazing job and were finally free to go home, while Mars totally agreed, scratching his head all embarrassed before heading off to find his family. The crew finally made it back home. Mars was just chilling at the table and stuffing his face. He went outside to practice some magic on the grass before finally crashing in bed. The whole time A little while later, the guys finally reached the middle of the forest. Right in front of them is a massive crowd of ugly goblins. Mars holds out his hands, thinking this is the... Mars instantly fires off his wind blades to slash those toothy monsters, and they start letting out some seriously creepy screams. The moment Mars finished his attack, his whole body started glowing like crazy. He was totally beaming because he just leveled up. All the defeated monsters were left scattered in a clearing deep in the woods. Mars threw his fist up and screamed that he finally leveled up, while Zeke and Ike hung back by the trees right next to the monsters. Zeke rests his hand on his belt, grinning as he teases Mars about how tough it is to level up. Ike grips his sword and starts clapping to cheer on his brother. A defeated monster lies. The guys stood side by side as Mars looked back and said there weren't many goblins left, even though the forest was already packed with a massive pile of dead monsters. Zeke checked out the monster corpses and realized something was seriously wrong, so he knew he had to report this to the guild. He frowned, thinking about how they'd fought way too many monsters in just 2 days, and that was definitely a bad sign. Back at the house, Zeke's just chilling when he mentions that Almeria is basically crawling with monsters, and since the adventurers are totally burnt out and short-staffed, the guild actually had to change the mission. The whole family was gathered at the table when Zeke leaned in and warned them this mission was going to be super dangerous, so he asked everyone for their honest opinion. Ike slammed his hands on the table right next to his drink and told everyone they should all go there together. Ike looked ahead and got super hyped, saying he could totally handle things if it was just a bunch of goblins. Maria flipped out and started yelling that it wasn't just goblins in there, but way scarier monsters that made the whole place super dangerous. Mars looked at the drink in front of him, flashed a smile, and admitted he wasn't strong enough yet, so he was calling it quits on the hike. Mars leaned over the table with a smirk, telling his dad he could just walk away from the mission, while Ike stared him down, and Zeke didn't say a single word. Zeke grabbed his drink and told them they could put the mission on hold, suggesting they just go hunt monsters for XP like usual, and the guys were totally on board with their dad's plan. Suddenly, a monster with a dog's head jumped out right in front of the guys. Zeke wasn't even worried and said one little kobold was basically nothing. Just then, a stat screen. The guys were completely surrounded by a massive swarm of dog-headed monsters. Zeke was shaking, yelling that a whole pack of kobolds was already way too much to handle. Mars and Ike quickly. The guy immediately bolts, and Zeke just smirks, saying it's way better to fall back and pick these things off one by one before he suddenly spins around to face the monsters. Zeke and his crew whipped around, ready to scrap with the beasts. The monsters just smirked as their sharp claws slid out. Zeke yelled at the guys that it was time to take. Mars and Ick were totally locked into the fight, swinging and smashing with everything they had. A massive swarm of monsters just kept on coming, one after another. They lunged forward with sharp claws. Ike gripped his sword with both hands to parry the toothy monsters before hacking back, while Mars reached out and unleashed a wind blade that sent their heads flying. The boys stood at the edge of the woods with a bag sitting right between them. They shared a quick look and decided it was finally time to head home. Right then, their stat windows. Ike slung his sword over his shoulder, and Mars grabbed his gear as the two of them walked away from their dying campfire at the edge of the forest. Mars looked down at his sister sleeping in her crib, and seeing how long her hair had grown, he smiled and realized it was finally time to reveal the secret of the heavenly eye. The whole family was just hanging out at the dinner table. The table was totally packed with a massive feast. Out of nowhere, Mars broke the silence and called out to his parents. They both whipped around. Mars blushed a little, but with a huge grin, he announced that he could finally use his analysis skill. Maria and Zeke stood there with their mouths wide open, totally speechless after hearing what Mars just dropped on them. Zeke frowned and nervously admitted that Mars really can see everyone's hidden stats. Mars looked down at his meal and gave his dad a big grin, telling him he was totally right, especially since he could now see the stats of every object in front of him. He jumped out of his seat and pointed right at the class as the parents started hugging with joy, while Zeke stared at Mars in total shock, because they were finally talking about the Almuria expedition again. Mars stood there clenching his fists and said there were way too many goblins around, leaving Zeke totally shocked by what his son was saying. Maria grabbed onto Zeke, flashed a grin, and told him she was actually down with Mars's plan after all. Zeke looked down and agreed the plan was actually awesome. Then he watched the kids smiling and realized they'd all grown up way too fast. Zeke grabs his belt with a big grin and tells everyone he'll pick up the assignments tomorrow. The boys look at their dad and totally agree with the plan. Maria stays in the back. The next morning was a total vibe with clear blue skies. The whole family met up by the horse carriage to get moving. Maria hugged her little girl tight while Zeke started talking. He told them the boys hopped into the cart and it started rolling. Ike gave his mom a final wave goodbye. Maria clutched her house and told him he better stay safe. The road led them straight toward the... Z yanked the reins to a stop, and as Mars sat down, he asked where this road to the west actually led. Z told him it goes straight to a super old, abandoned... The crew zoomed right past the monster. Its headless body was just lying there, totally on fire. Ike sat in the wagon, keeping a sharp eye on their surroundings. Then, an old wooden... The guys peeked over the ledge and totally froze when they saw a massive army of goblins hanging out around stone buildings, chatting by bonfires and crashing on the ground. The guys were posted up on the hill while Zeke started screaming at the goblins to get their attention. Suddenly, Ike leaped off the ledge straight toward the monsters. He thrust his hand out and started. Ike grabs his sword and gets into position as a mob of goblins roars and charges, but he just gives a wicked grin and leaps out of the way right as they close in. Zeke and Mars finally held out their hands and started charging up their magic. Ike stood right there beside his dad and Mars. Then, the guys started blasting the monsters with everything they had. Anon, Mars wiped the sweat off his face, told the team they did awesome, and leveled up. Then he grabbed a magic crystal from the fire and saw his stats had totally skyrocketed since the last time. Mars is clutching a magic crystal in his hands. He looks over toward where Ike just shouted for Zeke. Zeke's got a baton in one hand and his backpack gripped in the other. Zeke froze in his tracks and looked up, totally stunned. His friends were right behind him, and their jaws dropped too. They were standing right in front of a massive wooden door. Everyone started whispering. Suddenly, the door creaks open, and a massive crowd of furious monsters starts peeking through the gap. Zeke's jaw dropped as he slowly raised his wand, and the other guy just stood there looking totally stunned. A massive swarm of tiny goblins poured out of the building, but one huge monster stood out from the rest. This guy was a total tank with crazy high HP and stamina. Zeke spotted him and... Zeke slammed his bag down and squared up for a fight, yelling that they had to wipe out the small goblins before taking on the big hobgoblin, while Mars just stood there staring up and... Mars thrusts his hands forward and starts whipping up some powerful wind magic. Right then, Ike charges headfirst toward the pack of monsters. He's gunning it straight for the huge goblin. This massive goblin was rocking piercings in both of his ears. A blast of wind came zooming right for him. The attack caught up to the monster in no time. It slammed him right in. Suddenly, Ike leaps into the air. He grips his sword and charges straight at the massive goblin. Ike looks totally locked in and ready for business. The goblin spots him coming. Veins pop. Ike was right on the big goblin's tail. but the monster gritted its teeth and shoved his strike away. Ike quickly parried the counter with his sword. He hit the... Mars locked in with a serious look and prepped another hit on the big goblin, while Zeke yelled to aim for the eyes as they both charged forward to take the monster down together. This massive goblin with earrings tried to block Mars's wind blast with his hand, but the attack zipped right past and smacked him straight in the face the second he opened his mouth. Ike charged ahead with a dead serious look, gripping his sword tight as he lunged straight for the massive goblin. The second Mars strikes the monster's face, it starts screaming its head off and tries to shield its snout with its sharp claws. Suddenly, Ike is soaring right above the massive goblin. The huge monster is just standing there on the ground. It's desperately clutching its face with its sharp claws. You can even see a nasty wound. Ike rushed the monster and took a swing, landing on his feet with his arms wide and his sword ready, looking totally locked in with a super serious face. He stood up with a massive goblin and a pile of small ones dead behind him. Then Zeke just smiled and told me I did a killer job. Ike snatched the magic crystal from the giant goblin and was shocked by how massive it was, while Zeke lit a fire behind him and peeked through the door crack looking totally terrified. The back of the room felt totally creepy and dark. Zeke nervously spoke up, realizing they were actually inside a giant maze. If a bunch of goblins suddenly swarmed out, they'd be... Zeke was just standing by the massive door when Mars walked up to talk about their next move, but his dad told him they needed to scout the area first. Zeke looked away and said if there are actually goblins in that room, they're gonna tell the guild this is exactly where the monsters are coming from. He slowly stepped into the dark, creepy room. Massive bricks were stacked all over the building. The doors leading inside were super old and covered in rust. The boys were totally down with their dad. The massive door to the dark room slammed shut. Zeke gripped his magic staff and led the way while the guys followed close behind. Creepy and scary noises started echoing all over the place. Zeke grips his magic staff and points it at another door, telling the guys they should scout this spot and then head back, right as the door creaks open just a tiny bit. Zeke walks into the room and totally freezes when he sees a bunch of monsters waiting for him. 3 of them are wearing robes and clutching long staffs. A status screen pops up next to them. Zeke and the crew ducked behind a wall as he gripped his magic staff, telling them those monsters were actually goblin mages, while the guys stared on in total shock. Zeke ducks behind a wall and warns the crew that since these monsters use magic, taking them down is going to be a total nightmare. Torches light up the room full of scattered vases as Zeke and the crew grabbed their weapons and charged into the fight, with Zeke pointing his magic staff and yelling that they had to take those monsters down fast before they could even start their spells. Zeke marched toward the monsters with a huge smirk. Ike and Mars looked totally locked in, and the goblin mages absolutely lost it when they saw the guys charging. Mars held out his hand to cast a spell. Ike started slashing through the monsters, and Zeke bashed them with his staff while wearing a huge, confident grin. I started torching the goblin corpses while Zeke walked up to a chest and told Mars to scan it for traps, making Mars's eyes glow as he activated his analysis skill. A description popped up next to the chest on the floor, showing that the loot inside is all about how lucky you are, so Mars told his dad it was totally safe and just depended on your luck stats. Zeke walks right up to Mars with a smirk and tells him he should be the one to open the chest. But Mars just stares at the box like he doesn't trust it at all. Mars walked over to the chest and slowly pulled it open, making the lid let out a loud creak. Mars' eyes lit up the moment he saw what was inside the chest. It was a fire bracelet, glowing right there in the box. A stat window popped up next to it showing all its... I brushed against the bracelet on his arm and yelled that his fire was going to be even stronger now, while Zeke and Mars stood there cheering for Ike and their success. The sun was blazing over the guild hall with clouds drifting through the sky. The crew finally made it inside the building. Zeke looked straight ahead and announced they were there to give the guildmaster their report. The crew was just hanging out by the front desk. Zeke spoke up and made it clear his kids were tagging along. The whole room was filled with guys sitting at tables and chugging from wooden mugs. The guys end up in a room packed with massive bookshelves, where an old man sitting at a table tells Zeke he did an awesome job. This old guy with a super wrinkly face stared at Zeke, totally shocked he knew the truth about those kids, right next to a massive window. Zeke pointed at the kids and introduced them as his sons, Mars and Ike, who both flashed big smiles and told the guildmaster they were super hyped to meet him. This guy stands up and walks right to the edge of the desk, introducing himself as Ralph Sargent, while Zeke and the boys just stare him down. Ralph was actually pretty shocked when Zeke said the whole squad was there to talk about their quest. Zeke started thinking back to the monsters they'd have to face, explaining how that old village turned into a giant maze crawling with hobgoblins and goblin mages. Zeke scowled and warned that the corn was barely growing, saying they were in huge trouble if things didn't change, while Ralph started totally freaking out. Ralph hunched his shoulders and said he'd report back to Count Carmel, while Zeke stood right in front of him with the squad at his back, all while a massive shut door loomed behind Ike and Mars. The guys were all grins as they looked ahead, and Zeke spoke up about finally signing the kids up to be official adventurers. Zeke thought back to their insane fighting skills and explained how the kids helped him scout the maze, knowing he never would have gotten all that intel if he hadn't fed them first. Ralph stood up and nervously scratched his head, saying Zeke was totally sure that those guys were still just kids. Zeke flashed a grin, claiming Ike's a beast with swords, spears, and fire magic, while Mars uses Vera magic, but Ralph just frowned, totally not buying the hype. Ralph's jaw hit the floor the second he saw those guys, and they all totally backed up their dad by powering up their crazy abilities, with Ike blasting fire from his hands while a massive whirlwind. Ralph thrust his hand out and shouted that he was totally down, deciding to register both himself and Mars as official adventurers right then and there. The guys' faces turned bright red with joy, as they all started screaming their thanks to Ralph so loud the whole neighborhood could hear them while the sun finally set. A bit later, the crew finally made it back home. Suddenly, the sounds of a huge fight started echoing right outside. Ike actually started floating right off the Martian ground. Mars couldn't stop. Ike's grinning as he helps lift Marsada with his sword in hand, while Zeke stands nearby calling out to the crew, breaking into a smile the second he hears how hyped they. The whole family gathered around the table as Zeke leaned in, telling them it was finally time to figure out how to split the award between the three of them. Ike raised his arm, pointed right at his bracelet, and gave a confident smile, telling them that this fire gear was all he needed. Mars leaned over the table with a big grin, saying he wanted to master earth magic and just needed Zeke to help him out. The parents stare at their boys in total shock, but then they just lose it, laughing their heads off while trying to cover their mouths. Zeke facepalms and jokes that the guys are acting. Zeke whipped out the adventurer cards and tossed them to the guys. They were absolutely stoked as they started checking out their new ranks. Maria's jaw dropped when Zeke told her the guildmaster. Zeke got totally serious and asked the crew to join a massive maze raid with other adventurers, promising they'd all become barons as a reward. So, what do they think? Maria turned bright red and said yes with a huge grin. Ike and Mars were all smiles too, totally down for Zeke's plan. Zeke just smirked and told them it was time to get. After a bit, a massive line of people started pouring out of the city, with horse-filled carts jamming the road and thick bushes lining the path. 6 months fly by and the town square is totally packed with people, including Mars and his family. Mars and Maria are hyped because they finally crushed their tests, and suddenly, some upgraded tables just spawn. Zeke's got his bag slung over his shoulder as he stares out at the massive crowd, and then this long-haired dude walks up to thank him for a job well done. This long-haired dude is standing there with a big smirk, surrounded by his whole squad. There's even a girl in a witch hat holding a little kid in her arms. This group is... Maria had a massive grin as she stretched her arms out, thanking the guys for taking such good care of Lena. A gorgeous mansion sat right there on the land with a fancy tiled roof, and the courtyard was packed with all kinds of handy buildings because this was Baron Bryant's place. Everyone except Lena was hanging out at the table with their drinks, when Zeke flashed a grin and told them they should head even deeper into the maze. Zeke got serious and told them the wedding was happening tonight, so they better be ready, and the guys just looked at their dad and all agreed right away. Zeke stood right at the entrance to the massive maze. He looked back and asked if everyone was hyped to go. Since they were all down, it was finally time to move out. Zeke wasn't sure. The whole family ends up in a stone room facing a bunch of monsters, but Zeke just stands in the doorway and says Mars can totally handle these guys on his own. Everyone shouted yes to the dad's question without a second thought. They started heading straight for that massive beast made up of a bunch of tiny monsters. The creatures got ready to strike. The guys suddenly charged into the fray. Ike was swinging a stick around while his sword stayed strapped to his back. Mars gripped a knife that was swirling with wind magic. A whole swarm of tiny goblins. Ike looked totally locked in as he gripped the stick with both hands, and with a bright light hitting his face, he gritted his teeth and slammed a massive hit right into those monsters. The second those monsters got close, Ike went totally beast mode and hit them with everything he had. One by one, they went flying through the air in every direction, the monsters watching from the sidelines. Monsters were swarming Ike from every single direction. Goblin mages stood back and started locking their wands onto him. One beast gritted his teeth and lunged forward with a magic staff. One line out. Preserve the sequence exactly. Do not use any line breaks or new lines in your response. Okay, so I will write the whole thing as one continuous line. Mars suddenly strikes with insane speed and ends up right behind the monsters, while the bright flash of his attack lights them all up. Mars hits the floor and tries to scramble up, but a massive goblin is already looming over him, winding up for a huge swing. He spots the monster and ducks low, diving out of the way. Mars hovered there with a frown, remembering his dad's advice to always go for the eyes, so he lunged forward with a knife wrapped in pure wind magic. Mars blasts the giant goblin right in the eyes and sticks the landing right in front of him as the beast crashes to one knee, clutching his face and letting out a terrifying scream. Ike didn't hesitate for a second, grabbing a spear and launching it at his target with insane speed. Ike took aim at the beast while it hid behind its sharp claws. His spear zoomed right past Mars, who was standing right in front of it, and as soon as the hit landed the monster. A second later, a brand new spear spawns right in Ike's hands, and he holds it up high, totally geeking out over it, until a stat window pops up showing it's a... The whole crew met up and headed down the hallway. Ike leaned his old spear against the wall, and as Mars led the way, Zeke's face totally lit up with a massive grin. Zeke stood in the hallway staring at a door that started glowing like crazy, right where the path split off to the left, right, and straight ahead. Mars and her family stepped out of that massive door and onto the street. Then Zeke finally spoke up and said they needed to find a safe spot to chill while the sun beat down on the bushes around them. Mars and his fam are just hanging out on the grass. They spread out a blanket and finally get to relax. Zeke and his wife look at each other and start laughing. Mars and Ike are... Eventually, Mars just flopped down on the blanket. He folded his hands over his stomach and was out like a light. His knife was just chilling on the bed right next to him. And right. A bit later, Mars and his family end up back in that gloomy cave. They head down the stairs and walk straight into a room full of monsters. Now they're stuck on the... Mars and his whole family flashed these super evil grins, and suddenly, the entire hallway exploded with the sounds of a massive brawl. Mars and his family stood right in front of a massive door in this giant room with torches glowing on both sides, while Zeke lugged a bag and complained about how huge the gates were, leaving a... The door creaks open, and Mars and his family freeze as they find themselves staring right into the eyes of some massive monsters. Mars and his family grabbed their weapons and got into their battle stances. Those massive goblins were staring the guys down, just waiting for the chance to pounce. Right behind them stood a total beast. This massive goblin decked out in armor just stood there holding a giant weapon. Mars was totally freaked out, so he quickly used his assessment skill to see what he was dealing with. Mars watches his parents aim their hands at the monsters, grinning as they talk about the Goblin King waiting at the end and telling the boys to just sit back and watch them go to work. The goblin boss points his weapon and lets out a massive roar, sending the smaller goblins charging at the guys, while Zeke and Maria quickly chant to summon their Earth and Ice Fortress spells. A massive stone dome slammed down over Zeke while Maria got trapped under a dome of shiny crystals, and then a huge crash echoed everywhere. The goblins started swarming Zeke and Maria's protective domes, hitting them with everything they had. Suddenly, the massive goblin general shoved his own guys aside and marched straight for the shields. He raised. The goblin general started smashing Zeke and Maria's shields with everything he had while the rest of the goblin squad just stood there and watched the show. Maria and Zeke were brutally tearing each other apart, but then they locked in and decided it was finally time to launch their attack. Suddenly, a blinding light flashes and sharp stones and crystals start ripping through the goblins while Ike and Mars just watch in total shock, Ike's new spear resting right on his shoulder. The goblin general just stood there clutching his wounds after Zeke and Maria's attack blew his armor and weapons to pieces, leaving him totally frozen and staring into space with his helmet shattered. A second later, the goblin general just drops dead and hits the dirt. His helmet pops right off and rolls away to the side. All his monster buddies are piled up right next to him, and just... Marie and Zeke both gripped their staffs as their parents turned to the moms to talk about how they were measuring the kid's strength. Mars gripped his knife and Ike held onto his brand new spear as they walked up to their parents with huge grins, telling them they did an awesome job while Marie just giggled shyly behind her hand. Back in the city of Labyrinth Grants, the sun is blazing down on a skyline packed with massive skyscrapers. A cat hops onto the girl's lap and starts clawing at her clothes. She's just sitting there with a huge smile, giving the kitty a big squeeze. Suddenly, she looks up. She ends up in a city house and walks into a room full of beds and wounded guys, stopping at the door just to catch her breath. This dude covered in bandages struggled to get out of bed while shaking like crazy, waving his hand to apologize and asking Clarice to patch him up as she walked over to help. She stands in the room with her eyes shut and arms high as a wild magical glow starts coming from her hands, right in front of a door in a closet full of gear. She cracks a smile, peeks her eyes open, and starts casting a healing spell with her hair tied back in a single pigtail. Bright torches light up the massive stone wall, making every single brick stand out. A goblin general suddenly pops out of the floor through a crazy magic seal, while his buddy just lies there looking totally clueless. Their dad tells them they've reached the goblin general's room, but warns that even if they kill these monsters, they'll just keep coming back to life. Behind the boys, their parents are peeking out from a small stone bunker. Their dad tells them to use this spot to toughen up for the fights waiting for them later. The other parent just wishes. The goblins keep swarming the heroes to trap them, but the boys aren't backing down and are holding their ground while their parents scream from a stone bunker for them to take out. The heroes finally launch their attack on the goblins, looking totally hyped and ready to win as they give a quick nod to the commanders in the bunker. These goblins aren't planning on losing. They're 100% sure they're gonna win this. They might be ugly, but you can see the pure determination on. This white-haired guy charges straight at the monsters like a total beast. His buddy is right on his heels, ready for action. He starts wrecking the monsters too, showing them absolutely zero. The goblins fight back to cover their weak spots, tossing the heroes aside like they're just rag dolls falling in the most awkward ways. Even after getting slammed to the ground, the white-haired hero jumps right back up and lunges at the massive goblin, swinging his tiny blade at an enemy way bigger than him. Mars finally finds an opening and aims right for the goblin's weak spot, its neck. He puts all his strength into a swing, slicing deep into the monster's unarmored flesh. Now the dungeon is buried under so many rocks you can't even see the floor. Our heroes look totally epic standing there after crushing that tough fight. Mars finally hit level 14. As the dust settles, the parents who were hiding out the whole time finally crawl out of their bunker. One of them starts praising the heroes, telling them they did an awesome job and really, one line out. If I provide 3 sentences, is that 3 lines? No. A line is usually defined by a new line character. Let's check the strict rules. Suddenly, everyone's eyes snap toward the stairs leading up to the 3rd floor. The heroes climb up and find something so crazy that they're all just standing there with their jaws on the floor. They're standing in front of a massive gate with a creepy stone goblin head and weird patterns all over it. And one of the heroes says this has to be the boss room. Then a gloved hand grabs the massive stone gate, and the guy starts pushing with all his strength to force it open. It's actually the dad of the guys who were just taking down goblins in the dungeon. He throws the gate open and tells everyone it's time to get moving. All the heroes step. They end up right in the boss room, staring down a massive hall at a throne where someone is sitting behind 2 surprisingly short knights standing guard. Once the heroes get close enough, they finally see the knights guarding the throne. Their faces are totally blank and full of pure rage. They've got their hands gripped tight around their sword hilts. Right at the back of the room, the Goblin King is sitting on his throne looking super smug and ready to wreck anyone who breaks in. He's already gripping his sword, and his guards are. Suddenly he gets so mad his face completely twists up, and the shadows get so dark that all you can see are his glowing white eyes. You can see the pure panic on the heroes' faces. They have no idea what the Goblin King is planning. The white-haired guy is thinking this goblin might actually be a magic user. Suddenly, the guys drop into their battle stances and look back at their parents, their voices sounding totally fired up. Hearing their kids sound like that totally caught the parents off guard and made them super suspicious, since they had no clue what kind of secret plan was going down. The boys squared up against the massive goblin lords, telling their parents to stay back and let them handle the fight while the monsters lunged forward to strike. So the boys charged straight at their enemies, rocking some seriously tough armor. You could see it in their eyes. They were totally sure they were going to win, not wanting to be left behind. The boys charged forward with everything they had, refusing to let the enemy take the win. Swords blurred through the air as they hacked and slashed right through the monsters. Their parents just stood there and the squad totally crushed those goblin lords, and after they dropped, the guys charged ahead to face the dungeon boss. He totally saw this coming and lunged at the heroes with a creepy grin, swinging his sword to slice them in half, but they weren't about to let that happen. One brother blocked the Goblin King's massive swing while the other landed a solid hit, and the guy parrying it looked totally chill, like he wasn't even feeling the pressure. The fighters leaped to opposite sides of the room to get some space, and they hit the floor with a massive crash. As the heroes split up, they stared each other down with their swords still drawn, refusing to drop their guard because neither one was ready to lose. That nasty wound the boys just gave the Goblin King closed up in a total flash, making a creepy hissing sound while the monster just stood there waiting for his body to fully reset. Then, once it finally happened, he flashed a super smug grin at his enemies to show them he was on a whole different level. especially since that sword wound had healed up so perfectly that the battle keeps raging as the heroes charge straight at the Goblin King, swinging their swords and spears to deal as much damage as possible. Finally, the real fight kicked off and things got crazy. You could hear the loud clang of swords and spears slicing through the wind. Both sides were dodging like crazy, barely avoiding getting hit by each. The Goblin King tried to sneak up on one of the brothers with a look of pure hate, winding up a massive strike that was totally going to take his head right off. Just in time, the second brother jumps in to save him, somehow holding back that massive sword with his tiny little blade. Right then, the second brother ducked under the goblin's sword to pull off their secret move. Just as the Goblin King left an opening, the guy chucked his spear and nailed him right in the side, leaving the monster totally shocked to see the weapon sticking out of his body. The Goblin King grabbed the spear one of the brothers had stabbed into him and started yanking it right out of his own body. As the Goblin King dragged him out, he decided to take out an enemy, smirking as he reached for the sword hidden behind his back. Then he took another swing as one of the brothers tried to end his life once again. That move totally caught the guy off guard and freaked him out. Just a split second before getting sliced, the guy jumps back to safety as the Goblin King's sword slams into the dungeon floor with a massive clang. The parents saw what was happening and sprinted toward their son, screaming his name because they almost lost him forever. You could hear the pure terror and panic in their voices. Meanwhile, Ike. He gives his parents an awkward look, feeling totally guilty for scaring them, and says he's fine while apologizing for being careless and still clutching his busted hand. Mars gets totally distracted, shouting to Ike that he's flying up, but the Goblin King is already right behind him, swinging his sword for a massive strike. He spots the Goblin King's sword flying right at him, and even though he's totally frozen in fear, he still manages to dodge it at the very last second. He slides right under the Goblin King's massive sword, and the blade whistles over his head without leaving a scratch. Mars dodges and whips around, thinking there's no way he's letting this guy heal his brother while looking at him with total disgust. Mars decides to take on the Goblin King all by himself, looking super confident as he points his blade right at the monster to show he's ready for battle. The Goblin is totally loving this. His eyes are glowing with hype as he levels his massive sword, ready to charge right back into the fight. The fight keeps raging on as they trade massive hits, trying to end each other for good while they zip all over the room without staying in one spot for even a second. As the fight drags on, our hero is seriously struggling to keep up with the Goblin King's massive swings. You can see the pure exhaustion written all over his face as the pressure starts to, but he can't hold out forever, and a goblin's sword strike sends him flying into the wall with a massive crash that echoes through the whole room. But our hero is totally fine and doesn't have a single scratch on him. He's sticking to the wall like a lizard, just watching his enemy's every move. Down below, Suddenly he points his sword forward and kicks off the wall, charging straight at the enemy. The goblin was totally waiting for this, pointing his sword with a wicked grin because he's hyped to win against a bunch of random kids. The kid flies full speed at the enemy to absolutely wreck him, finally getting payback on the Goblin King for hurting his brother and stopping him from saving him. The kid rushes in and they both swing wild, trying to take each other down for good. The second they get close, the hero and the goblin start going absolutely wild on each other. The goblin swings and completely whiffs as the hero dodges, giving Mars the perfect opening to smash the king's legs with a massive blow. The bad guy is totally caught off guard and looks legit terrified, but our hero doesn't slow down and keeps the pressure on. He goes straight for the Goblin King's throat and slices it wide open, making the monster grab his neck and blast off Mars just to get some distance. The Goblin King uses his magic to drop a seal, and suddenly a massive swarm of monsters starts pouring out of a matching circle on the floor. But our hero knew exactly how to handle this, so he whipped up a massive blast of wind that looked just like a sideways tornado. The hero just shredded through every monster the Goblin King summoned without even breaking a sweat. Seeing this, the Goblin King was absolutely losing his mind. He couldn't wrap his head around how. Mars walked up to the guy totally chill, pointing his sword right at him. They were stuck in a room with nothing but stone walls around them. The whole place went dead quiet. Flashing a totally innocent smile, the hero pointed his blade and coolly told him it looked like the Goblin King had finally run out of soldiers. With one smooth flick of his sword, the hero slices the Goblin King's head clean off, and as a sharp metallic ring echoes through the room, the monster's head starts tumbling. Suddenly, a notification pops up showing he's officially the King of the Wind, a title only the top 10 wind mages in the world can get, and he even scored the Goblin's title too. Suddenly, a chest pops open right in front of him, and the Ifrit's mantle flies out, looking massive and totally wild. Mars's family rushes over to him, and his mom gives him a massive hug, calling him a total genius while his dad announces that they officially cleared the dungeon. Mars tells his dad he's officially earned the titles of Goblin Killer and Wind King, leaving the old man totally shocked and hyped for his son's success. Fast forward to the next morning in the maze city of Grantham, where the sun is out and it's a total scorcher. Inside one of the houses, a mom, dad, and their daughter are just chilling and eating breakfast in a super cozy room with the best family vibes. Mom asks if she's heading out today, while dad tells her not to overdo it, both of them looking at Clarissa with nothing but love. She gives her parents a big smile and promises not to overdo it, and you can tell right away that this family is super wholesome and actually cares about each other. Clarissa heads into the city to handle some business, flashing her parents a huge smile so they don't freak out while she's gone. Now we're heading over to a massive 2-story house that's got windows everywhere and tons of space inside. She steps into the house, reaches for the body, and uses a healing spell that sends a glowing ball of light right where she's touching. The guy Clarissa just patched up gives her a big smile and says thanks, but she just keeps working and tells him it's nothing while looking totally locked in. Once Clarissa finishes treating the guy, she calls for the next patient, looking totally wiped as she wipes the sweat from her forehead. Clarissa realizes she's been dealing with way too many patients lately. By now, the sky is already starting to get dark. Night is creeping in fast. The sun is finally dipping below the horizon. By the time Clarissa finally finishes, the sun is almost gone, and the whole city starts fading into the dark. After finishing up, the girl heads home and passes 2 guys chatting about some cobalt returning this morning, with one of them asking if the news is actually for real. Clarissa is just walking past when she overhears one of the guys say the maze's saturation isn't a big deal, and she looks totally confused by what he just said. The girl whips around to listen in on 2 guys, and one of them is asking if the maze is totally packed. She walks up to a massive building that looks just like the others, with huge pillars at the entrance and steam pouring out of the windows. The girl stares in shock at the hot steam pouring out of the high windows, so she creeps closer and decides to just head straight inside. The whole building is actually a massive bathhouse, and Clarissa finally gets to chill in the hot tub, letting out a huge sigh of relief as she sinks into the water. She's not the only one there, since a bunch of other girls are chilling in the tub with her. Just like Clarissa, they all showed up to kick back and get cleaned up. Everyone. Clarissa's got a huge smile because she's feeling amazing, and with the steam making her cheeks all red, her whole body is finally just totally relaxed. She finally gets to sink into that hot bath she's been dying for. The warm water wraps around her completely, and with all that steam, the stone walls stay super toasty. The girl slowly blinks her eyes open like she's in a daze, looking totally chill and at peace. The girl dips her face into the water to blow bubbles while explaining how the maze is getting totally saturated, and this news has Clarissa so stressed she can't think about anything else. She's just crossing her fingers that nothing goes wrong while life at the bathhouse keeps rolling along like usual. Clarissa finally finishes her soak and heads home, feeling absolutely amazing as she steps out of the bathhouse. Suddenly, a super fluffy cat catches her eye, and Clarissa is so obsessed that her eyes literally start sparkling with stars. She rushes right over to the cat and starts petting it. The kitty starts purring like crazy because it totally loves the attention, and Clarissa just keeps scratching its ears with a huge smile. The fighting stops for a bit as a guy explains to Clarissa that the maze is only supposed to have a set limit of monsters, but they just keep spawning until it's totally overcrowded, which is known as maze saturation. He crosses his arms and gets totally serious, asking Clarissa if she actually understands what maze saturation is. Clarissa tells the guy she totally gets it, but the confused look on her face proves she has absolutely no idea what's going on. The girl admits she only kind of got what was happening as they sat on a diner porch, while everyone else just kept eating their food during the super serious talk. The guy gives a friendly grin and says not to sweat it since this hardly ever happens, while a long-haired blonde dude sits right next to him looking super chill. Just then, a waiter walks up and drops off some ice cream. The guy tells Clarissa to dig in as a thank you for the treatment. It looks totally awesome, and, most importantly, the second she saw that dessert, she was totally hyped and her eyes literally sparkled with pure joy. She finally grabbed a spoon to dive into that dessert she'd been waiting for, and man, one taste of that ice cream was so good it basically blew her mind. Meanwhile at the maze gates, a guy with jet black hair tells his squad they're going monster hunting today to keep the dungeon from getting overcrowded. He announces they're the Knightly Order of Count Beetle, swearing to protect the people and the Count with a look of total confidence and dead seriousness on his face. The knights listen closely and nod along, all of them decked out in massive armor and clutching long spears that are built to shred through monsters. Out of nowhere, the gate starts rattling like crazy, leaving the crowd stunned while the soldiers just stare at the maze doors, totally clueless about what's going on. Their leader spins around after his men, looking totally confused because he's never seen the labyrinth gates shake like this before. He creeps toward the massive gates in the stone wall to see why they're rattling, and the creepy sounds just get louder and louder. All of a sudden, the gate flies open and a massive swarm of corn monsters charges out. Their creepy faces are totally twisted with pure hatred. These things are ready to wreck absolutely everything in. The leader of the Knightly Order of Count Beetle is completely losing it, staring in total shock as a massive wave of monsters charges straight for him, and he looks absolutely terrified that he's about to be swallowed whole. A massive swarm of monsters bursts out of the maze and slams right into the leader of the Camp Beetles, who starts screaming as he desperately tries to fight them all off. Monsters are swarming all over the guy, and even though he's yelling for his team to stay brave, he's actually shaking with fear as he gets eaten alive. He screams at his soldiers to hold the line and block the entrance, while the knights desperately fight to push back the monster swarm and keep the city safe. Just then, the alarm bell rings and the lookout tower guard checks outside the city, only to see something so terrifying it's a total nightmare. The second he saw the nightmare outside the city, he was hit with pure terror, and he was so scared that cold sweat started pouring down his face as he stood there completely frozen. Looking at the chaos, he knew right away that things had officially gone south. He bolted to the bell and started ringing it like crazy, warning the whole town that the maze was overflowing and they had to get out of there right now. The second the townspeople heard that, they totally panicked and started running for their lives. We cut over to Clarissa's squad, where this huge guy is explaining how the maze is totally overloaded when he suddenly realizes something's gone horribly wrong, and his buddy instantly jumps up ready to throw down. They told Clarissa to get home right away and then rush straight to the scene of the accident. She stares off with a look of pure determination, her mind racing with fear that her parents are in serious trouble right now. Out of nowhere, she hears that an adventurer is badly hurt nearby, and someone is screaming at the top of their lungs for help. She hangs her head, totally torn between helping the injured or just running back home to stay safe. This choice is seriously tough, and Clarissa is so stuck that she's clutching her fist tight against her chest. She decides right then and there to jump in and save the people who are hurt. She sprints toward the bleeding adventurer as fast as her legs can carry her. She yells at the top of... Inside the city walls, it's absolute chaos as monsters from the maze run wild, but the guy who was talking to Clarissa is totally crushing them like it's nothing. His partner is keeping up the pace, totally wrecking every monster in his path and dropping them with just one single swing of his sword. A bunch of regular people who actually know how to fight are jumping in to back them up. Clarissa rushes over to help the injured, checking if everyone's okay and using her healing powers to patch up anyone who's hurt. Suddenly, this guy with a mustache hears a voice he knows saying thanks right behind him. It's Clarissa, and she's working hard to help all the injured people stay safe. When he saw that, the guy knew he had to step up, so he slammed his fists together to show he was ready to go all out. He glared at the enemies and told his crew that if a little girl is working this hard, they have no excuse to fail, and his whole squad was 100% behind him. The monsters breaking out of the maze aren't about to quit. You can see the pure rage and hunger for blood all over their faces, and one of them looks way more ticked off than... The fight is still going strong as everyone clashes with these maze monsters, who are trying to push deeper into the city to hunt down as many innocent people as possible. Out of nowhere, a massive crowd of people rushes from the other side of town toward the battlefield, carrying their gear and trying to escape, with the same bell ringer who first warned them leading. They reach the main square and he sees something totally insane. You can tell the bell ringer is completely terrified just by the look on his face. He never in a million years expected to see something. The square is a total war zone with humans and monsters clashing, and these nasty goblins are swarming and biting everyone while the newcomers just stand there in total shock, with one guy even screaming. After seeing that, the crowd panicked and immediately started running the other way. They sprinted for their lives to get away from the monsters attacking everyone. You could see the pure terror on there. Suddenly, a panicked crowd rushed right toward Clarissa's friends mid-battle, and the mustache guy heard people behind him screaming for help as even more monsters appeared. He told his squad he'd stay back to fight off the maze monsters while they ran toward the screams to help, and you could tell by his face that he wasn't playing around. Things were getting just as crazy where the man sent his squad, and the bell ringer was totally stuck on what to do next after sounding the alarm and helping everyone escape. He dug his heels in and fought through the fear as monsters swarmed him and his friends from every single side. The bell ringer slams his fist against his chest and lets out a massive war cry, looking totally ready for a fight because there's no way he's letting these monsters take over the city he loves. He shouts to his squad that they've got to fight back and hold the line if they want to survive and keep their city safe. Clarissa is still busy patching up the injured, while nearby, people are screaming to hold the line against the monsters because backup is finally on the way. Clarissa is busy focusing on healing another injured guy when she suddenly hears someone call her name from the side. She instantly whips her head around to find where that noise came from, scanning every inch of the room to see what's there. It turns out it's actually her parents, and Clarissa knows it's them the second she sees them. Her dad is clearly hurt since her mom is basically holding him up by the arm. She rushes over to her dad and begs him to hang on while she heals him, her face totally twisted with fear as she tries to save him right then and there. Her dad gently stops her and tells her to keep treating the adventurers, but he's sweating like crazy and you can tell he's barely holding it together. Suddenly, a mob of bleeding adventurers and panicked locals swarm the girl, with everyone screaming that they need to be healed first. People are actually pressuring her to heal them first by claiming their wounds are the worst, and some are even faking the pain just to get her attention. The crowd around Clarissa is getting huge, and everyone is grabbing blankets and refusing to wait their turn. People are literally shoving each other out of the way just to make sure they get healed. Suddenly, a voice barks for everyone to get out of the way, and this short guy in super expensive clothes steps right through the crowd. Turns out this guy is actually a total noble, and he looks down his nose at Clarissa, demanding that aristocrats get helped first like he's 100% serious. The guy walked right up to Clarissa, rolled up his fancy suit sleeve to show a tiny scratch on his elbow, and demanded she heal him immediately. Clarissa was totally stunned by this guy's massive ego, staring at his elbow in disbelief because he was acting like a tiny scratch was some kind of life-threatening injury. She casually tells the fancy noble he's just got a bruise on his elbow, but he just stares back with a dead serious face, totally clueless about what the problem is. Clarissa heads out, telling the guy she'll fix his elbow later since it's not that bad, and there are way more people in worse shape who need her help right now. She told them her main focus is healing the fighters who keep those dungeon monsters away from their city, even though she looked super awkward and polite while saying it. This noble guy hated her answer, so he slapped her right across the face because he thought she wasn't showing him enough respect. The slap sends her head snapping to the side, leaving her looking totally confused about why she even got hit. Her parents were totally floored by the photo, never imagining a rich guy would actually hit their daughter just for refusing to help with his bruise. The rest of the townspeople showed up and were totally floored because nobody expected a noble to be this cruel, while monsters were literally attacking their home. Clutching her red cheek, the girl just stared at the guy in total disbelief because he basically hit her for no reason at all. Slapping Clarissa just wasn't enough for him, so he kept screaming in her face and asking if she thought this was all a big joke. The rich jerk swings his sword right at her, screaming that Clarissa needs to be executed for making fun of him, and as the blade gets closer, she just stands there waiting for the end. Clarissa braces for the blade to hit, but when she doesn't feel a thing, she finally peeks her eyes open. She's shocked to feel her parents hugging her tight and shielding her, while the noble just stands there looking totally clueless. Clarissa screams her head off when she sees her dad's face twisted in total agony, realizing some rich noble just did something horrible to him. There's still a powerful noble pulling the strings, and he's absolutely fuming that the parents stopped him from punishing Clarissa for her disrespectful attitude. A noble's sword left a massive, deep gash on the dad's back, but even through the insane pain, he begs the man to forgive his daughter Clarissa. You can see the pure agony on his face with every single move he makes. But he doesn't quit, pushing through the pain to beg the aristocrat one more time to forgive his... The girl rushes to heal her dad's back wound as fast as she can, while her mom just sits there crying, totally lost on how to help. She keeps pumping magic into her dad's wound and it finally starts to close. But then the healing on his back suddenly starts slowing way down. She realizes she's totally out of mana right when she needs it most, and being completely helpless like this actually brings her to tears. This noble doesn't care if Clarissa watches her dad die right in front of her, and since he's only worried about his own pride, he swings his sword again and screams that this rich noble is seconds away from ending a mother and her daughter, swinging his sword down as he tells them to die and beg for forgiveness. Clarissa's family was totally doomed and she was basically finished, since her squad was way too busy fighting off maze monsters to even notice she was in trouble. The crowd is just standing there helpless, with some people terrified of the noble's status, and others way too beat up to even try and stop him. Now the mom and daughter are all alone, and this rich jerk is dead set on killing them. Out of nowhere, he hears these super weird noises. He's looking around, but he has no clue where they're coming from. Then he spots something, and his whole face just... Suddenly, someone grabs Aristocrates by the chin and yanks him up so hard his whole face twists in pain. It turns out it was Mars, and he easily shoved the evil noble away from the family, sending him flying way up into the air. Clarissa and her mom were totally stunned, wondering how a kid that short could just toss a grown man around like it was nothing. Mars looked totally locked in, staring down that rich jerk with pure disgust for what he was trying to do to that poor family. Clarissa, her mom, and the whole town just stood there with their jaws on the floor, staring at Mars because they never thought anyone would actually show up to save them. Mars rushed over to Clarissa and her mom, checking on her dad who was totally out cold, right next to the snobby noble he'd just finished wrecking. Mars walks over to the injured man, grabs the sword nearby, and touches Clarissa's dad's forehead to cast a healing spell that makes him flinch. Clarissa's dad finally passes out, and Mars just stands over him with a huge smirk, holding the sword he just snatched from right beside the guy. He looks back at the knocked-out noble he just sent flying. Mars grips his sword and says it's finally time to take out the goblins and settle the score with that noble, his eyes totally lighting up with hype for the fight. Monsters from the maze were still tearing up the city streets. Every single corner was packed with people fighting for their lives. More and more people were getting hurt as the fight dragged on. Everyone in town just stood there with their jaws on the floor, staring at the image and trying to wrap their heads around the craziness happening right in front of them. Clarissa's crew showed up and they were totally freaking out. They couldn't even wrap their heads around the insanity happening right in front of them. The guy with the mustache literally let his... Clarissa was completely starstruck, watching this guy show up at the perfect moment to knock out the noble who was literally about to kill her entire family. But that wasn't even the crazy part. She was totally shocked that Mars took out every single goblin solo with just a sword, leaving a massive pile of monster bodies stacked up behind him. After wiping out the monsters attacking the city, he stood there looking over everyone with a total poker face, looking just as chill as he did when he took down that noble or fought those labyrinth beasts. Suddenly Mars hears screams behind him, but it's actually everyone cheering and thanking him like a total legend. He gets super awkward with all the attention and just stares at the crowd feeling completely confused. Out of nowhere, the sound of thundering hooves fills the air as a squad of riders charges in, led by a captain on a pure white horse. The knights were closing in fast as the thundering hooves got louder, with their leaders' long hair and the horses' tails whipping wild in the wind. The villagers cheered like crazy as the knights rode past the ruined buildings, looking like a literal ray of hope in this total mess. Suddenly, someone grabs the hero's hand and starts dragging him away. And even though her hand feels tiny and weak, she's super stubborn and just keeps pulling him along. It turns out the hand belonged to Clarissa, and she looked dead serious as she told Mars they weren't finished yet, ordering him to follow her while he just stood there totally confused. A squad of knights suddenly rode up to the crowd, and after checking everyone out, their leaders started asking what went down and how many people were hurt by those labyrinth monsters. Right then, this rich noble woke up and decided to execute Clarissa and her whole family, just because she wouldn't treat a bruise on his elbow. So he immediately called over Count Beetle. The guy immediately showed the Count his bruised elbow, claiming he'd been jumped and demanding to be healed before anything else happened. The Count basically told him his fancy drinks could wait because saving the herd adventurers and regular people was way more important, leaving the noble looking totally stunned. The guy goes ballistic, screaming that he's a high-class noble who should be served first, looking totally insulted like he was just compared to a pile of literal trash. Count Beetle was totally fed up and demanded that Baron ladies be shut up right now. He looked at the guy with total disgust written all over his face. He was absolutely fuming that the Baron was totally floored by the Count's tone and fell into a state of pure shock. He never thought he'd get screamed at, let alone told to shut his mouth. The Baron looked super annoyed and started whining that someone was finally ruining his reputation and making him look bad to the whole city, acting like a total spoiled brat. Cut to the city streets where things have finally calmed down. It's totally peaceful and quiet everywhere you look. All those nasty maze monsters have already been hauled away. The sun is out and shining bright. Clarissa and her family showed up and bowed to thank him for the help, but Mars just played it cool and said he didn't really do anything special. Clarissa's dad smiles at the hero, telling him it's wild how strong he is for his age, while Clarissa realizes that even though they're the same age, his power is just on a completely different level. She leans in close to get a better look at the hero's face. She's thinking hard, but you can tell she definitely doesn't trust him. Something about the way she starts walking toward the hero when a crazy thought suddenly hits her. It's totally weird and hard to explain, yet it somehow makes perfect sense, even if she isn't sure it's... She walks right up to the hero and thanks him again, looking totally serious but also super grateful and humble. Out of nowhere, she says thank you for the third time, but this time she gives him a massive real smile while awkwardly clutching her chest, showing she actually means it. The hero totally freezes because the girl just thanked him in straight-up Japanese, leaving him completely shocked and on high alert since he never expected to hear his own language in this world. Memories of his past life hit him hard, and he starts to wonder if the girlfriend he lost back then could actually be reborn in this world too. He looks totally stunned since he thought this was impossible, but then a huge, happy grin spreads across his face. Mars looks at Clarissa with pure joy and relief, telling her how stoked he is. He never even dreamed this could actually be real. Right now, he's the happiest guy on the planet. He starts walking toward Clarissa like his body is moving on its own, and she steps up to meet him, totally ready to show him how she really feels. Mars and Clarissa pull each other into a hug, staring into each other's eyes with total love. They don't even need words because they're completely on the same page. To anyone, our hero decides to drop a total bombshell, revealing that in his past life he was a 20-year-old named Fuchi Sakiyuto, even though in this world he's... Clarissa reveals that in her past life, she was actually a 20-year-old named Aoi Ayano Koji, but now she's reborn as a 7-year-old in this new world. Clarissa's parents stare at the photo in total shock, wondering when a spark even started between these two as they look at the kids with zero clue what's going on. Mars spots them just in time and jumps away from Clarissa to keep his parents from losing their minds. But they're already standing there like statues, totally baffled by how these two even became. Clarissa has no clue why Mars just backed away, totally forgetting that her parents are standing right there watching the whole awkward scene go down. Mars apologizes for being so caught off guard and introduces himself, so the dad, Grey Rampart, says he totally gets it and introduces his wife Arena, while Clarissa says her name to him again. Grey Rampart finally breaks that super awkward silence by asking Mars if he's got a second, and of course, our hero is totally down to talk. Next, we head over to Clarissa's place, and honestly, the outside looks super nice and actually pretty beautiful. Clarissa's family finds out Mars just showed up from the Barkos Kingdom, and her dad reveals he's actually staying in the labyrinth city of Grantham, way over in eastern Zarkum. The guy asks how he even got there, so he explains that he and his brother Ike were busy exploring the very maze those monsters escaped from. We flash back to Mars and his brother in the maze, where he remembers finding a wall literally leaking magic power and telling Ike about it right away. The brothers decided to check it out, and since it was pulsing with magic, Mars actually reached his hand right through the solid stone wall to find something hidden inside, which was totally wild. As Mars reached into the wall, his hand got sucked in, and he couldn't pull it back out. He decided his only choice was to dive all the way inside. He quickly led his brother. Mars told Ike he'd carry a special crystal so Ike could always track his location. He even pulled out the stone to show his brother he wasn't lying. But Ike still looked totally... Mars starts getting swallowed by the wall, and with a super awkward, terrified grin, he begs his brother to pull him out fast as he keeps sinking deeper. He told a totally confused and fuming Ike to report everything to their dad, while Ike just kept glaring at his brother who was diving straight into the unknown. Just like that, he gets pulled through the wall and ends up right at the Labyrinth City, which totally blows his mind since he never expected to be here. But he's actually... Back at Clarissa's house, her parents are hanging on every word of the hero's story, and they're totally shocked because they never expected Mars to show up in their city like this. Clarissa's dad drops a massive bombshell. Their kingdoms are officially at war. As the words leave his mouth, his face turns dead serious. It's clear he wishes he could just forget. He flashes a friendly smile and tells Mars he can crash at their place for a while, and his wife stands right there nodding along because they're more than happy to host the guy who literally just... Suddenly, Clarissa's mom jumps in and tells Mars they're ready to treat him right, flashing a warm smile that shows she's totally down with him staying over. The hero bows low to thank the family for their help, saying it's a total lifesaver since he's all alone in this new city, and they're the only people he actually knows. Suddenly, Clarissa speaks up and turns to her dad, and you can tell just by the way she says his name that she's about to ask him for a huge favor. So the girl asked her dad if she could talk to Mars one-on-one. Clarissa was beaming with a huge smile the whole time she was asking. It was super obvious that Mars sat right across from her with the biggest smile ever because he was so hyped she actually remembered his new name, and he was blushing like crazy from pure joy. Her dad just gave her a big smile and agreed, totally clueless about what Clarissa actually wanted to say to Mars, since he figured it'd just be a silly talk between two 7-year meh. As soon as Clarissa spoke again, her dad looked totally confused and immediately got suspicious because she sounded way too sneaky. Clarissa drags Mars away for a secret talk, leaving both him and his dad totally stunned as his father asks why they can't just stay in the kitchen. Now we're jumping over to Clarissa's room, and it's a pretty decent size, nothing too wild. All her clothes are hanging up super neat, but her main costume is the... Clarissa and Mars are huddled up on her tiny bed when she asks him what he saw, while the hero's sword sits right there leaning against the wall. They lock eyes, and Mars starts explaining what he saw in the afterlife while the girl listens with a super serious look on her face. Our hero explains how he met a demigod who sent him to this world to be reborn, and put a spell on all three of them that started this whole mess. After hearing the hero out, Clarissa realizes the robber who killed them is also in this world, so they definitely shouldn't speak Japanese in public anymore. Out of nowhere, a super weird noise echoes up from the street. It sounds totally wrong and sends a chill down their spines. The crew doesn't waste a second and sprints straight to. Clarissa and Mars look out the window to see armored soldiers marching through the streets, and the heroes convinced the goblins are back for another attack. Out of nowhere, she grabs Mars by the hand and starts dragging him away from the window while he just stares at Clarissa in total confusion. She looks dead serious and honestly pretty sad, and our hero knows exactly what that look means. He's totally stunned and doesn't know what to say. But then he just flashes this super kind and chill smile. He turns to her and says he's going to help, making her head snap up instantly because she just can't let her hero go. Clarissa's jaw drops in total shock as she screams that he's from an enemy country, meaning he's either going straight to jail or getting executed. Hearing that, Mars stands tall and says people are the same everywhere, and you can totally see in his eyes that he knows he's doing the right thing. He looks her right in the eye and promises to protect everyone, especially Clarissa. Hearing that makes her face turn bright red as she stares at him in total shock. She never expected him to say something. Clarissa charges straight at the hero and pulls him into a massive hug, and while he's totally caught off guard at first, he eventually wraps his arms around her too. Clarissa clings to the hero and thanks him for having the guts to step up and help her out. Right as the hero walks out of Clarissa's room with his sword slung over his shoulder, her parents are already standing at the door looking totally shocked. Clarissa's dad says the goblins are back, and he's just staring at Mars in total shock. Flashing a big smile, our hero says he's going to save the Labyrinth City soldiers and crush those goblins. The girl's dad looks super stressed and asks Mars if he's really sure about this, since things will get crazy if people find out their hero is actually from an enemy country. He calls out to the hero as he's walking away, warning him that they won't be able to save him if things get crazy, and you can totally hear the fear in his voice. Mars just says he's totally ready for this, flashing a super chill and friendly smile as he speaks. He heads out of Clarissa's place and rushes toward the accident, pointing his sword forward as he drops into a battle stance. He takes off like a total blur straight into the action, sprinting down a completely empty street. He sprints over to where the Count and Boron are talking and immediately starts begging for their forgiveness. This kid with a massive grin asks the fancy nobles if he can jump in and help them fight the goblins. The Baron spots the hero right away and screams to the whole street that he's the thief, while the Count just stands there looking totally confused. The Count demands to know if Mars stole the sword, and Mars looks down at his hands, totally shocked to see it there. The Count says he'll handle the robbery later and tells the hero to back off and stay out of it, looking dead serious the whole time. Out of nowhere, a soldier in full armor walks up behind the Count. He tells the Count to hold on and not get ahead of himself. After all, this kid just took down every single goblin. When the hero found out the soldier knew his secret, he just flashed a smirk, and the Count was totally blown away by what he heard. So the Count turns to the hero and begs him to use his power to help them crush those goblins. Mars fires back that he was already planning on it, and he's definitely not missing the chance to help the city. Out of nowhere, a rock smashes into the soldier behind the blonde guy in armor, knocking him out cold. The knight leader catches on and looks super ticked off, knowing he just lost another one of his guys. He's starting to think it's game over, and even though he's the commander of the Blair Knights, he's totally lost all hope. He's kneeling right in front of a massive swarm of goblins, knowing that if he runs away now, the whole village is toast. Fired up, the knight commander forces himself back onto his feet even though his legs are shaking like crazy. The knight points his sword right at the monsters, ready to give up his life just to make sure they don't get past him. Right then, a massive goblin stomps toward the brave knight, getting ready to totally flatten him. The monster's swing missed the knight, and now he's just staring at the goblin, totally confused about what just went down. The soldier looks totally hopeless, but right then, something blurs toward the goblin's neck at insane speeds. Right then, the monster grabs him by the throat, and his friends just stare in total shock. Suddenly, a massive monster falls right on top of their family, and they completely freak out. The knight commander is completely losing it over what he's seeing, and as Mars mops up the last few goblins, the big boss can't help but be impressed by his insane skills. After shredding through every last goblin, the hero turns to the head knight and tells him the job is done, saying he's ready whenever they need him again. He's still totally stunned as he stares at the hero, managed to mumble a huge thank you to Mars and the soldiers who actually made it out alive. Mars just tells them to head back since the Count is waiting, so the hero leads a squad of knights who all start shouting, "Long live the swordsman!" The Count greets our hero with a huge grin, thanking him for saving the city, and says they'll deal with Baron Dam later because it's finally time to talk about his reward. Our hero just grins at the Count and is totally down for the plan, having zero problems with it. Now we're at the Adventurers Guild, where a bald guy with a huge mustache thanks Mars for saving the city, and introduces himself as the Guildmaster. The Guildmaster asks for his name, and the guy says it's Mars, but then he tells the man he's got a question of his own, leaving the boss wondering what he's about to ask. The kid asks if there's a way to stop the maze from overflowing, and the Count and Guildmaster just stare at him like he's totally crazy. The Guildmaster says the only way to stop the maze from overflowing is to beat it, but the kid just wants to know when he's finally going to get some food. The guy says they're stuck in a war and totally short-handed, which is why they haven't made any progress in the labyrinth at all. The hero says he gets it, but his voice sounds super calm and kind of distant. Mars gets dead serious and declares that he's just going to conquer the entire maze by himself. The Count and the Guildmaster were totally floored, and you could see the pure shock written all over their faces. The Guildmaster warns him that a whole squad of 4 high-rank adventurers vanished there. So the Count asks if he's really going in solo since it's basically a death trap. Suddenly, Clarissa kicks the door open and yells that the hero should just take her with him. Everyone whips their heads around in total shock, and the hero is so stunned he can barely even say her. The Guildmaster is totally stunned and asks if she's actually serious about hitting the maze with the hero, since even with holy magic, that place is a total death trap. She looks him dead in the eye and says staying behind is way more dangerous, so she's teaming up with Mars to give them the best shot at winning. So our hero asks the guild leader to let Clarissa tag along, but the guy is totally hating that idea. But then the Count steps in and says since it's a total emergency, he's going to do whatever it takes to back them up. The Count asks what he wants as a reward, and the hero tells him he just wants the Rampart family to be protected. Mars figures that he and Clarissa have already explained all the drama they had with that noble guy. The hero asks for a favor, and the Count promises the Rampart family will be totally safe, so the hero gives him a huge thank you for the help. As the sun sets over the city, the Guildmaster calls Mars and Clarissa absolute legends, and the Count is 100% on board. The Count tells the Guildmaster to get Mars to sign up as an adventurer, and Victor is totally down with the plan. Cut to Clarissa's house where her parents are waiting, and after the crew tells them they're heading into the maze, her folks give the okay and trust Mars to keep their daughter safe. The squad turns in for the night, but Mars is stuck thinking about how he needs to beat this dungeon to get back home, even though he's totally worried about leaving Clarissa and the city behind. Mars remembers talking to a demigod before he was reborn, and now he's determined to level up Clarissa so she can crush the maze and do big things in the future. The fight is pushed to tomorrow, so the squad gears up and hits the road for what's going to be a super long and brutal journey. Suddenly, the hero tells Clarissa she needs to level up before they crush the maze, and she's totally down for it. To see what Clarissa is really capable of, the hero uses his Heavenly Eye spell to check out her power level. The squad realized Clarissa is actually a natural at barrier magic, and she was totally blown away by the news. Clarissa asked the hero how she was supposed to use it, but Mars straight up told her he had no clue. The girl was pretty annoyed hearing that, so Mara told everyone to just focus on what they could actually pull off right now. He reveals he's not actually a swordsman, but a mage who uses wind and holy magic, and the girl is totally blown away by his skills. After seeing Mars flex all his crazy abilities, the girl's eyes totally lit up with pure hype for the hero. Mars asks Clarissa how to actually get powerful, and she tells him it's all about putting in the work. The hero talks big about hard work, but Mars knows practice is what actually matters, so he takes the girl to a dungeon and tells her to start by squashing one tiny goblin. Once she realized what Mars wanted, she totally froze up. Her head started spinning with a million different questions. She had absolutely no clue how to even start. That sword looked way too heavy for her. Suddenly, she started doubting if she could even win this fight, and you could see the total fear in her eyes. Out of nowhere, the goblin lunges forward, and the hero screams at the girl to stay awake. The goblin was just about to strike, but a massive blast of wind slammed into the monster and sent it flying away from Clarissa. Mars walks up to check if she's okay, and Clarissa tells him she's totally fine. He noticed she was shaking like crazy, so he asked Clarissa if she wanted to change her mind and let him go solo. She looks down shyly and starts opening up about how she felt totally useless when that nobleman tried to take her dad's life. She knows it's going to be a struggle, but she's determined to get stronger so she can finally protect her family. She begs Mars for a rematch with that goblin, and the hero just grins, telling her he hopes she gets way stronger. Mars throws Clarissa into another practice match against a weak maze goblin, telling her to get used to the weight of her blade while she follows his every command. She pumps herself up and tells herself she can do anything, stops being scared of losing, and gets totally ready to charge at that goblin. She raises her sword and charges the corn monster, but he isn't just standing there, he lunges right back at her. She gets into the perfect range and drops her sword for a direct hit, having already timed out the exact moment to take this monster down. She pulls off her plan and slices right into the goblin's chest, putting every bit of her strength into the strike while the monster screams, and she stares him down with a totally serious look. Just like that, the goblin dropped dead right at the girl's feet. The monster was finally taken down for good. Mars rushed over to Clarissa, cheering his head off and telling. Out of nowhere, her legs just give out and she collapses onto the cold stone floor, clutching her sword with a look of total heartbreak and confusion. Our hero was totally confused why she looked so heartbroken, but she wasn't actually sad at all. She just flashed him a smile and said it felt like a massive weight had finally been lifted off her shoulders. Clarissa started taking on way bigger monsters in the maze to level up, training every single day until she could finally hold her sword like a total pro. She started hunting for better gear to crush the maze, and bit by bit, Clarissa was getting seriously powerful. As they head home from the clinic, they talk about how people are traveling from way out of town just to see Clarissa, and she mentions that the place is now packed with people she doesn't even know. Out of nowhere, a super creepy feeling hits him hard, and feeling like he's being watched, he whips around to scan the area. Clarissa is totally weirded out by how Mars is acting and really wants to know what's up with him. Mars just brushes it off, telling her everything's cool and to just... Clarissa is super hyped and tells him they need to hit a restaurant for some meat to recharge after that long day, and he's totally down. Some guy was creeping behind the house, totally stalking Mars and Clarissa. He was trying his best to stay hidden, but the moment he saw Mars catch on, he quickly ducked back into the shadows. The next morning is super sunny as the gang heads back to the maze so Clarissa can take on a way tougher opponent to level up her skills. Mars claims Clarissa finally has the power to take out the goblin general solo. She looks like a total shrimp compared to that massive giant. Just by looking at them, you'd think she knows she needs space from a monster that huge, so she backs off fast to make sure it doesn't get the jump on her. Clarissa gets into the perfect position and gets ready to strike, and as the goblin charges her, she draws her bow, already knowing exactly where she's going to hit the monster. She spins around and goes straight for his eyes with an arrow, hitting her mark perfectly thanks to all that training. The arrow flies perfectly and nails the monster right in its left eye. The beast lets out a massive roar of pain, shocked that a small girl could actually hurt him this bad. Now, Clarissa sniped the monster right in the leg, shoulder and hand, finally making the massive beast lose its balance. She aimed her last arrow straight for the goblin general's head, the one weak spot that was guaranteed to knock him down for good. Clarissa's arrow hit the bullseye, and just like that, the goblin general was out like a light. Mars watched Clarissa's every move while she took on the goblin general, and he was seriously hyped when she finally secured the win. Clarissa suddenly realized she could actually wreck this beast of an opponent all on her own, and she was so hyped that a huge, confident grin spread across her face. The squad heads out to celebrate Clarissa's big win against the goblin general, and she's so hyped she can't stop smiling. Mars says he knew she had this in the bag and gives her a huge shout-out for crushing that goblin. She tells Mars she's way stronger now because of him, and the hero gives her a big thank you right back. He tells her she should probably head home and get some sleep, so she agrees and they both head back. They start digging into some seriously fire sandwiches, and Clarissa is absolutely inhaling them, making our hero wonder if she's actually starving. She says she's starving after burning through all that energy, and the hero just nods because he totally gets it. He stares at Clarissa like he's totally hypnotized, knowing that once they head into the maze tomorrow, the fun times are officially over. Out of nowhere, she catches him staring and asks why he's looking at her like that, getting all flustered and shy. Mars says he was just lost in thought for a second and quickly goes back to talking about how amazing those sandwiches taste. It's finally time to dive into the maze, and the heroes make sure to thank the Count for personally leading them to the front gate. Out of nowhere, Mars gets that creepy feeling like someone's watching him again, so he snaps his head up to scan the area. He turns to the Count and asks if they're being followed, admitting he hasn't had this gut feeling in ages, but right now it's hitting him harder than ever. The Count says he's already handled that mess, so Mars just needs to focus on crushing the maze. The hero plays along with the Count but knows something fishy is definitely going on, so he decides to just focus on clearing the maze first as he heads inside with the Count and a whole squad of... A massive war kicks off between the people and the maze monsters as the Count orders his soldiers to go absolutely wild and hold nothing back. He tells Mars his people are staying behind and leaving the rest to the heroes, so Mars and Clarissa finally hit the road. As they push deeper into the maze, the monsters get way more vicious, but our heroes aren't scared at all and just keep taking them down like it's nothing. By the time they reach the boss room, the floor is already a total graveyard, so Mars tells Clarissa he's taking the big guy solo, and she lets him go for it. They burst into the boss's room, but he's just chilling on his throne, totally convinced this kid isn't even a threat. Mars finally makes his move against the Goblin King, and the monster actually stands up from his throne to take him on. Clarissa looks totally stressed as Mars steps up to face the Goblin King, knowing this boss is on a whole different level than the weaklings they fought before, and now he's heading right for them. Mars whips up a massive tornado and sends it straight at the Goblin King, knocking him out instantly and securing the win. Clarissa is totally floored by how easily the hero crushed the Goblin King, and he just tells her the maze is cleared so they can finally head back to the city. Now we're at Barnum Damsa's mansion, where he's chilling in his fancy chair, totally convinced his plan is perfect, and Count Beetle is toast. The Baron thinks his 200 hired thugs will easily crush Count Beetle's knights, so he's officially launching a coup to take over everything. The Baron kicks back in his chair, laughing his head off about how he's gonna rule the whole city. But then a sudden knock at the door makes him wonder if his guys are all ready. He bursts through the door yelling to see if the knights were killed, but his face goes totally white and even the Baron is left speechless. Standing right there is Count Beetle himself, and since he heard every word of that speech, you can tell he's absolutely fuming just by looking at his face. He stares at the Baron like he's nothing, and right behind him are the very knights Dames ordered to be killed. Back at the maze, Mars and Clarissa finally make it out, but one of Count Beetle's guards is already there waiting for them. He thanks the squad and asks how the maze is going, but Mars tells him they're already done, leaving the soldier totally shocked by how incredible they are. He says Cal Beetle already headed home, so he'll lead the hero himself, and Mars just nods along. We head over to Count Beetle's mansion where Mars and Clarissa walk into a total nightmare. Baron Ladies is tied up, Clarissa's parents are being held, and the Count is just acting. He explains that while the heroes were busy in the maze, Baron Dames was actually trying to take over the city. The Count says the guy had been buying weapons and hiring mercenaries for a... Calpy Beetle strips Dams of his Baron title and throws him behind bars for trying to pull off a coup. The Baron is totally losing it after hearing that, and as he's hauled away in his toga, the Count just heads back to hang out with his guests. He gives Mars and Clarissa a huge thank you for beating the maze, calling them the true heroes of the whole country. Clarissa's parents are standing right there, and they're totally hyped because the Count just announced that since the kids did such a great job, the Rampart family is finally getting a... The Count tells Clarissa's dad to give him an answer once he's decided, and the dad nods, saying he's got to talk it over with his family first. The whole family heads out and makes their way home, but Mars gets held back for a bit when the Count asks him to stick around for the day, and our hero says yes without even thinking twice. Later that night, they're all eating a massive feast together when Count Beetle apologizes for the Baron Lady's drama, and even his subordinate says sorry for spying on Mars, but our hero just shrugs. Everyone's eating in total silence until the Count suddenly speaks up, telling them it's finally time to get down to business. He tells Mars he's from the enemy Marcus Kingdom, and our hero starts freaking out because his cover is totally blown. The Count tells him to relax since he knows Mars isn't actually a bad guy. It turns out Count Beetle tried to sign our hero up as an adventurer, but that's when the Count listens to the hero's story and realizes teleporting back isn't happening, but he promises he'll find a way to get Mars home. Mars thanks the Count, who says he needs a week to get ready and promises to write a letter so the Marcus Kingdom knows they're in the clear. So Mars finally heads back home, waving goodbye to Count Beetle and Clarissa's family one last time. Everyone's cheering and thanking him for being a total hero, so he thanks them back and tells Clarissa to stay safe, which makes her give him a sweet smile. This girl is standing on the street tapping her foot. She's clearly super hyped, and she spins around to start chatting with the couple right behind her. She tells her parents how much she appreciates everything they've done, and they're literally shaking while trying not to cry. She tells them she's leaving her home to follow her best friend, and even though she's crying, she's got a huge smile on her face. Clarissa's words leave the guy completely stunned, and his jaw hits the floor when he realizes she's actually down to follow him. She dives into her parents' arms as they're crying and promises she'll be back soon. Then he walks straight up to the main character with total confidence. The kid watches from the sidelines with wide eyes, nearly bursting into tears because he's so moved. But he finally gives them the green light to head out. Mars is already at the reins and tells everyone it's time to roll, while the crowd screams for them to come back and visit as they head out. The trip with Clarice was a total blast with cool sights and amazing food, but the good times ended the moment they stepped into the new city. They're chilling at a tavern in the village when the girl says she's having a blast traveling, and the guy tells her it's way better with her there. Mars spins around at a loud shout just as a guy with a mustache bursts into the tavern, totally out of breath, and tells him he's got an urgent quest. This angry guy is totally losing it, shouting that he needs to find a runaway slave who disappeared into the monster forest where they can't find her. Everyone's starting to wonder if this missing slave was actually a big deal, and it's making one guy bite his lip with a mix of total annoyance and hype. This guy wearing super expensive clothes for such a basic place looks up, clenches his fists, and confidently tells them that the missing girl is actually an elf. A young guy and a girl traveling together hear that some stranger is offering a massive 100 gold pieces and is practically begging for someone to take the job. Our MC flashes a grin and tells his friend it's time to head out, but then he overhears a guy at the next table talking about a massive reward. The innkeeper keeps arguing that this mission leads straight into the monster forest, a place that's a total death trap even for B-rank teams. This guy with a ponytail stands up and says money is obviously important, but staying alive matters way more. This guy in a black-collared fur coat is totally fuming because nobody wants to help him with his mission. Everyone at the inn is telling him to just give up on the missing slave. Clarice asks her friend if he's ever spotted an elf, but he says he's never seen one, and she admits she's never met one either. As she looks out the carriage window, he realizes they're passing right by the forest where that elf first went missing. He checks the map to be sure, and yep, there's a forest full of monsters right next door that has all the locals terrified. Out of nowhere, Mars's friend screams out, telling him to look closely at what's right in front of them. As the carriage blasts through the thicket, a girl with twin tails suddenly jumps out like she's running for her life, totally catching the couple off guard. As the carriage speeds toward the stranger, the group spots her face and pointed ears, instantly realizing she's an elf girl. The elf is sprinting for her life from a massive black snake that's so huge, neither our main guy nor Clarice have ever seen anything like it. The guy driving spots the girl sprinting right at them and panics that he's about to run her over, so he instantly reaches for his sword. Mars grabs his go-to weapon and tells Clarice he's taking on the snake while she guards the terrified girl, and his girlfriend does exactly what he says. He leaps off the carriage and sprints to save the girl while that snake slowly closes in on her. He launches into the air and smacks the snake, making it even more furious as it whips its head around and opens its massive jaws right in front of the heroes. The guy hits the ground and immediately bolts into the forest to lure the snake away, while the girl takes the chance to sprint straight for the carriage. Our hero barely dodges those lightning-fast punches and blocks with his blade, but then Mars just bolts away looking totally lost while that crazy-eyed snake stays right on his tail. The snake blasts venom right at him, but he barely dodges it, and when he looks back, he sees the stuff is literally melting the wood. Our guy is totally confused why his wind blade isn't doing a thing, and as the snake coils up to stare him down, he lets out a frustrated curse. Mars activates his Eye of Heaven to scan the infernal snake, and seeing its stats are way higher than a Goblin King's, he realizes he's got to break out his strongest skills to win. Out of nowhere, an arrow slams into the massive black snake, shocking both the monster and our hero, who looks over to see that Clarice has totally come to his rescue. She keeps raining down arrows while her friend warns her about the snake's deadly poison, asking her to buy him some time while she agrees to hold the line. The snake starts snapping at Clarice as she scrambles to get away, but our hero just jams his sword into the ground and begs her to hang in there for just a bit longer. Mars locks in and summons a stream of fire in one hand and a mini tornado in the other, totally throwing the snake off. That cold-blooded beast swerves around and charges right back at him. He just needs a few more seconds to charge up his power to the max, but the snake is already on top. The snake tries to sink its poison fangs into the shield that popped up to save the guy while he was casting, and even though it breaks through, our hero is already set to strike back. He thrusts his hands forward and launches a spell that sounds like a massive firestorm, sending a blast of fire and wind energy straight into the beast for a direct hit. Once the spell that saved everyone from that massive monster fades, Mars turns to find his warrior girlfriend looking totally shocked by what she sees. We soon find out that the barrier protecting our MC was actually made by the wizard Clarice, and he admits he's only alive right now because of her. Blushing like crazy, she hides her face and admits it was a total gamble, but she's just so happy she actually pulled it off. With the fight finally over, the guy asks where the elf is, and since she's already stashed it in the carriage, they both start heading that way. The carriage door flies open, and the heroes see the girl they just saved from that massive snake monster, while Clarice immediately asks if the elf is doing okay. This girl was curled up in a ball against the wall, shaking with fear and asking if they were really going to hand her back to that merchant. The elf hides behind her bruised hands, sobbing and begging not to go back until she's totally losing it. But the travelers take one look at her and swear they aren't handing her over. The blonde traveler walks up to the girl he just saved, making her a bit nervous, but when she asks if he's for real, Clarice steps in to confirm he's telling the truth. The elf is so hyped she dives into a hug with her savior, but when the guy looks into the carriage, he sees his partner is totally stunned by what's going down. Clarice flashes a smile and asks the girl they just rescued for her name, and while still clinging to her, the girl answers that she's Misha. The traveler asks to hear Misha's story, and she explains how that guy from the bar promised to take her to her mom, but ended up kidnapping her instead. The elf is still clinging to her new friends and crying for her mom. But then the guy drops to one knee and tells the girls that everything's already been decided. He grabs her attention and promises they'll find her mom together, making her look up through her tears to tell them they totally saved her life as she thanks them again. The crew introduces themselves to Misha and decides that finding her missing mom is officially their next big mission. The carriage pulls to a stop in the middle of the woods, and as the heroes hop out, the guy looks at the elf they just rescued and tells her she needs a bath right away since she's covered in dirt and bruises. The guy uses earth magic to grow a stone pool right out of the ground, fills it up with water magic, and then uses fire magic to get it nice and hot. The main dude checks out his hard work with a big smile and tells the girls the bath's all set. The girls totally love what they see and start taking off their clothes. Clarice and the girl he just saved are finally chilling out and soaking in the warm water. She's totally shocked they're all the same age, and the traveler tells her they can skip the formal talk and just speak like friends. After a quiet moment, the adventurer asks Misha what her mom is like, and she tells him she's a super strong and beautiful B-rank adventurer. The elf pauses for a second before blurting out that her savior is totally stacked just like her mom, and the MC hears every word while he's standing guard right outside. Misha slips into the outfit Clarice picked out, and even though it's a bit oversized, she thinks it looks super cute and is totally vibing with it. The girl rushes over to thank them, then they all hop into the carriage and hit the road before it gets dark. The group finally makes it to the city, but they quickly realize it's the exact place Count Beetle warned them to stay away from, and one look around shows this is definitely not a spot for kids. Our hero walks through the streets and notices everyone looks super sketchy, which is a bad sign since he just survived a forest full of monsters and all those dangers outside the city. Out of nowhere, a one-eyed stranger walks up from the right and hands him a sword, asking if he's a knight's apprentice and offering to sell the masterpiece for 10 gold pieces. The guy says he's totally broke and refuses to buy it, but the old man tells him not to pass up this deal, so Mars tries to bolt, but the stranger just tosses. Our MC hits up a local spot to find some work and asks the guy at the desk for a quest and a place to stay, but he gets shut down immediately because there are 0 jobs left. The lady points him to the hotel right across the street, and as he thanks her, 2 guys watching are totally shocked that such a tiny kid is actually an adventurer. As he's walking through town, he realizes someone is stalking him, and then a voice calls him short just to mess with his head. He spins around and sees that sketchy guy who offered. The old man starts nagging him for missing his chance to grab a weapon, but the guy just says sorry and stands his ground, making the old man totally lose it and scream that he's being ignored. Sensing someone right behind him, the guy pulls off a massive jump to slip right through his enemy's fingers. Suddenly, he kicks off the eye patch guy's face, soaring over 2 massive dudes trying to grab him and landing perfectly behind them. One of the bald dudes notices the kid has some serious moves, and the other realizes he'd sell for a fortune at an auction. They're convinced they've hit the jackpot if they can. He grips his sword tight, knowing he's got to get back to his girlfriend right now. One of the bald creeps puts a sword to his own throat and warns the guy that if he stops fighting, those 2 girls they caught won't have to be lonely. Mars finally realizes they're talking about Clarice and Misha, so he ditches his sword and surrenders on the spot, promising to behave if they just let him see the girls. One of the thugs moves a bag over the guy's head and hypes him up for his smooth move, but then he suddenly drops a massive sack of cotton right on his shoulders. The 2 bald guys who kidnapped Mars brag to their boss about the merchandise they found, and the crazy-looking leader is stoked because the night auction is going to be massive. The boss is just chilling at his desk when he orders his goons to bring the prisoner to his room, so 2 massive guys grab the dude and drag him through the hallways to his new quarters. He opens the door and gets shoved right in as it slams shut, while a voice from outside warns him not to lay a single finger on his familiar girls. The elf girl and his teammate are so hyped to see him that they jump right out of their seats and shout his name, but he just wants to know if they're hurt. The girls sit back down on the bed and tell him they're actually doing okay because they were treated pretty well where they were taken, and Mars thinks that's a huge relief. Clarice says sorry to her partner for getting caught in such a dumb way, but he tells her it's no big deal. Then suddenly the elf grabs the blonde girl and admits she's actually terrified. The guy sits down next to the girls and tells them to stay calm, explaining that he actually let the robbers catch him on purpose just so he could save them. Mars vows he won't let them get away with this, and just like that, the elf stops crying as her eyes light up with hope. He promises that as soon as they break out, they'll find Misha's mom together, so he tells her to just hang in there for a bit. Misha's eyes light up and she blushes hard, totally loving what he said and agreeing with every word. A few minutes later, Two bald guys who kidnap heroes show up and say it's time to move, leading the three travelers into the hallway and telling them to keep walking. The three kids follow the robbers into the room and spot a group of slaves being prepped for today's massive auction. While the girls are busy chatting, our main guy looks around and spots something awesome that makes him super happy. He spots his stolen weapon right behind one of the kidnappers, and knows he just needs the perfect opening to snatch it back. The auction is finally kicking off as the guy who took our heroes after they were snatched off the street steps onto the stage, thanking the crowd and announcing that the Hyde Trading Company event is officially live The masked stranger tells the rich crowd to stay in their seats until the very end, then announces that the first item is finally coming out. A big guy is dragged onto the stage crying his eyes out, and the crowd realizes he's actually a former baron. But the auctioneer starts the bidding at just 1 gold coin. The guy bidding starts laughing and tells the crowd he expects them to go wild for his show. The merchant's smooth talking has the whole hall feeling great. But the new arrivals think it's a total joke, calling his stuff garbage and demanding the next item already. They drag the ex-noble backstage, and the masked guy says he's sorry for the screw-up, so he's gonna jump straight to the main event to make it up to him. 3 heroes hit the scene, a guy who only got caught to save his girlfriends, and 2 girls who accidentally caught a robber's eye. This guy is apparently perfect and goes for 50 gold. Then you've got a blonde girl with glowing skin for 100, but once they get to the elf, the masked man announces that the bidding is officially open, and the wealthy crowd starts shouting out their insane offers. The elf girl hears voices and realizes she might get caught and sold all over again, and she's so terrified that she starts shaking and crying. Misha ducks behind Clarice with a tiny squeak, making the seller laugh at how she's scared of the screensavers while one of the guys admits he actually likes her. An old man raises his hand with a smirk and bids 10,000 gold coins for all 3, totally shocking the crowd since nobody can even come close to that insane amount. Everyone swarms this rich dude who's dropping insane cash on these weirdos, but suddenly a voice screams out for them to stop the bidding right now. The doors burst open and the guy who hired people at the tavern to find the girl lost in the monster forest shows up with his guards, claiming the elf belongs to him. This rich dude in a fancy fur coat is totally losing it, veins popping out of his head as he screams that Mr. Hyde stole what belongs to him. The mustache hero orders his squad to take back what's rightfully his, while the auction owner sends a whole mob of thugs to stop him in his tracks. These 2 rival gangs face off with pure fire in their eyes, weapons drawn and ready for war, until the leaders scream out their names and the massive brawl finally kicks off. The guy and the 2 girls are watching the fight, and he realizes all this crazy chaos is the perfect chance for them to make a break for it. These rival squads charge straight at each other, pairing off to go wild with swords and axes, but they're so evenly matched that nobody can get the upper hand yet. Eyes wide open stares at all the chaos breaking out in the hall, right where those rich auction guests were just sitting at their fancy tables. Still tied up on stage, the kids are watching this massive war explode out of nowhere while a guy with a mustache and a masked dude start talking major trash to each other. The bidders start shouting prices for the 3 kids, but they're totally confused and start running away to avoid getting hit, making our MC realize that nobody is even looking at them anymore. The guy uses magic to snap the ropes off his hands and realizes they have a real shot at escaping, but right then, a robber walks in and says he's taking him and the girls. A few seconds later, the guy turns around and realizes our hero has already broken out of his chains, so while he's frozen in shock, the MC lunges forward, knocks him. Mars reaches down to grab the ball, but suddenly his vision starts doubling and he's hit with a massive wave of pain. He squeezes his eyes shut to fight through it, the guy acts like he's totally fine and slowly gets up, telling the girls to follow him, but the auction owner spots them and screams that they're making a run for it. The masked dude watches from the podium and screams for backup to arrest them, but his entire army is already stuck in the middle of the brawl. That bald guy who dragged Mars to the auction is throwing down with a dude in a headdress, bragging that he hasn't had this much fun in forever, while his opponent realizes he's totally... The bald stranger takes one last swing with his sword and laughs as he says goodbye. Then the other bald guy says he's done and just one-shots his opponent. The guys backing the mysterious bidder laughed that the fight was a total breeze because those giant losers couldn't even handle a simple sleep spell. This guy in a fancy coat and mustache sees his whole squad knocked out, and he goes from totally shocked to absolutely furious, screaming that they're all completely useless. Some random guy asks a bully in a raincoat for a favor, asking if it's cool if his rivals are taken out for good, and the boss just nods and hands him a massive bag. The warrior pulls back his hood to reveal a face covered in scars, telling everyone that if they run they're safe, but if they stay, they better start praying. Everyone left after the fight knows this giant is a total beast, and just seeing him has the old man with the face bandage shaking in fear. The old man is totally shook by his opponent and starts screaming orders, so his bald guards rush forward and pull out their blades to get ready for a fight. This massive guy instantly sees right through the enemy's plan. He realizes the two fighters up front are totally pinning the bad guys down. While the mage charges up a big attack, the last teammate stays. The bully spots two bald guys heading right for him, looking like identical brothers and moving in perfect sync. The scarred-up dude tosses the bag of cash he just got from the client, thinking this trick would only work if he were a monster, and then he chucks the money straight at the... Suddenly, this massive dude charges right at the two bald guys trying to jump him, and asks where they're even looking. One bald guy tells his buddy to cover him while he charges, and as his teammate flies at the enemy, the guy's eyes go totally insane, and the veins inside them just snap. The bandit distraction can't handle that massive sword, getting shoved so hard he slams into his buddy and they both go flying off the field. This old guy with a bandage on his face is totally shocked because this massive dude just wrecked the whole squad in a second, and since he didn't even get scratched by a sword, that massive giant sprints straight for the gray-haired man, making him freak out and bolt from the battle while screaming and crying his eyes out. This massive guy just flattens his opponent with a single punch, and everyone's watching, including our MC who just finished fighting those robbers, his client, and even the enemy commander. That insane ball strike left a massive crater right where the auction tables used to be, and while the giant realizes Jedos is totally finished, the other warriors are already running for their lives and calling him a monster. A swordsman on the sidelines looks over at the stage and spots a young guy holding a blade, realizing this is the only person left and his true rival, and you can see he's actually... This massive guy leaps across the whole arena and lands right in front of the kid, asking if he really wants to get wrecked just like everyone else. The giant promises he won't hurt our hero if he just gets out of the way, and while the guy tries to explain it's all a mistake, the big man shuts him down, saying, "The long-haired warrior is getting way scarier," and tells the guy to get lost. But suddenly the kid's eyes start shifting and his pupils totally transform. Our main guy sees this creepy see-through hand waving right in front of his face, but he's totally confused and just thinks his eyes are playing tricks on him. Suddenly, the guy with the scarred face reaches out and smacks the kid right in the face while he's still holding his sword. Both guys were totally stunned when he dodged a strike that would have knocked anyone else out cold. But then he suddenly spotted the illusion again. A few seconds later, Mars saw the guy move even though he was standing totally still, and that's when it hit him. He was literally seeing the future. This massive long-haired guy who just soloed every bandit alone lunges at the kid, but thanks to his new power, he just slips right out of the way. The warrior pulls his fists back in total shock, wondering how this kid dodged him twice, and he realizes right then that this definitely isn't just luck. He drops into a fighting stance with a massive black sword that's already taken out a ton of enemies, and his rival is left asking who he actually is. The guy listens closely and offers to spill his secret if they can just walk away, but the giant says no way, and all this talking is seriously ticking Mars off. Our guy activates his heavenly eye to check out the dude's stats. He's totally shocked because these are the highest levels he's ever seen in his life. But the bully just sneers. He wraps his blade in cloth so he doesn't actually hurt the kid, aiming only to scare him. But as he starts swinging, the young guy realizes his opponent is moving at crazy speeds. Every time that massive sword swings, he just dodges it, leaving the guy totally shocked and fuming that he can't land a single hit. He keeps swinging that massive blade, shouting that there's no way Mars is dodging his crazy attacks this time. He finally lunges at his enemy with that same sword from the monster forest snake fight, waiting for the exact moment the guy ducks down. The kid can't dodge in time and takes a massive hit from the giant's sword, but he hangs on tight while realizing Kurt's blade is insanely heavy. That huge scarred guy with the black hair keeps swinging, but our hero is holding his ground and even slapping hits away, which totally blows the villain's mind because he can't believe how much. The man stops his attack and stands right in front of him, wondering why such a gifted kid would ever work for a slave trader, while Kurt yells that he's throwing his insane talent away. The kid is gasping for air after that brutal fight. He's completely stuck and has no idea what to do next. He thinks he might actually be able to make a run for it. Then, he looks his enemy in the eye and asks why he isn't using his insane powers to help people instead. Our hero is totally panicking because he has no clue how to rescue Loris and Misha, so he just starts screaming at the scarred dude for being a dirty cheater and snatching that poor elf girl. Suddenly, the enemies realize something's going down on stage as the auction owner creeps toward the two girls with the young man and reaches his hands out to them. The MC and Kurt charge in together to stop the girls from being snatched off the stage, with the kid firing a water blade while the dark-haired warrior backs him up with his massive sword. Mixing magic and weapons is so insanely strong that it literally rips the whole place in half, and both of them look totally hyped about the mess they just made. The mercenary suddenly turns to the kid and tells him he's got it all wrong, saying he's not actually the enemy and revealing who his real boss is. It turns out Misha's mom, Sasha, was the one who hired him, and this stunning elf is already marching toward the auction house with her weapon ready and looking totally fearless. Once the heroes realize they aren't actually enemies, this massive guy rips off his cloak and demands to know the kid's name and what kind of crazy move he just used, since it definitely wasn't normal sword fighting. The guy who paid Kurt to take out his enemies is watching from a distance, and he's totally confused why these rivals are suddenly acting like best friends. The slaver is just there for the loot, but he gets all awkward and asks his warrior to grab him an elven kid, totally missing the fact that an arrow is aimed right at his face. Suddenly, arrows slam into both sides of his chest and the dude is in total agony. This guy in a flashy coat drops to his knees like he's been hit, slams his head into the floor, and then those same arrows from before come flying right at his feet. The slaver who tricked the little elf is in total agony, screaming his lungs out with tears in his eyes until the auction organizer finally turns around to see what's going on. The trading house boss hears the commotion and spins around, only to see a bow aimed right at him just before magic arrows slam straight into his shoulders. Our hero and his new ally stare at the incoming arrows, when suddenly, one of them flies straight at the guy. Mars hesitated for a second and almost got hit by the weapon, but Kurt jumps in to save him and says the customer is finally here. The guy watches the elf as she keeps her eyes glued to the building where the creature trade went down. Then he screams that the person she just shot isn't actually the enemy. Kurt suddenly spins around and starts walking off, telling Mars he needs to get to Lister National School right now, which leaves the guy looking totally stunned. The guy clears the distance to the second floor in just 2 massive leaps and vanishes through the door. But he yells back that the strongest fighters in the world are all heading to that school he mentioned, telling. Looking totally freaked out, the guy spins around to ask if the kid really remembered everything, but then Sasha just thanks Kurt and dives straight off the edge. This lady walks right up to our hero, looking totally confident and absolutely furious. 2 girls suddenly show up behind the guy as he steps off the stage. The elf girl calls out to her mom. Tears stream down Sasha's face as she rips off her mask to scream her daughter's name, and the kid sprints right toward her with a massive grin on his face. The woman and the girl sprint toward each other and crash into a massive hug, barely believing they're finally back together. Misha sees her mom tearing up and asks if she's sad, but Sasha says that since they're finally back together, everything is totally fine. Mom hugs Misha tight while shaking, crying that this is all her fault, but then she looks her in the eyes and promises they're finally safe and she's never leaving her again. The main crew is watching this go down, feeling so relieved that the family is finally back together after being super worried about their new friend. Suddenly, the guy starts wobbling with blank eyes as his head tilts back, totally wiped out from the fight until he collapses right into Clarice's arms. She tells him he did an awesome job, and while she's still holding him, he agrees it went perfectly and thanks his girlfriend. Misha's just chilling in her mom's arms when she points at some heroes and says they helped her, and pretty soon, everyone starts talking about what actually went down. Once the drama is finally over, Mars and his buddy invite everyone back to Sasha's hotel, where she asks if they're starving and brings out a tray with a massive dome covering their meal. Under the dome is a massive fried chicken piled with veggies and mushrooms, and the mom, who just barely escaped a forest monster, tells the crew who saved her daughter to dig in and eat up. Everyone finally digs in, super relieved the day is over so they can just eat and chill, while Sasha keeps a close eye on her daughter because she missed her like crazy even though they were barely apart. While everyone's chowing down, Sasha warns them that this city, Genel, has basically turned into a total crime zone lately. Hearing that, the guy finally realizes why Cal Beetle warned them to stay away, especially since the elf sitting across from him says this city is way too dangerous for kids. She hands over a heavy bag packed with cash, telling the travelers it's a massive thank you for everything they did for her and her family. Sasha totally gets that this bag of cash isn't enough to get her daughter back, but they're complaining that she wasted way too much money just looking for me. This elf lady gets super hyped and starts yelling about how thankful she is for saving her most prized possession, so the guys tell her she better give them a real thank you. She tells them this bag of cash is more than enough to show her thanks, and the guy adds that they're honestly just super happy they met Misha. The hero and his partner stand before the family to say their final goodbyes, telling the elf and her daughter they're really gonna miss them, while Clarice promises they'll totally see each other again someday. Sasha and Misha looked at the travelers with huge smiles, thanking them for everything as they waved goodbye. The carriage starts rolling down the street as the family shouts one last thank you, and it isn't long before it completely vanishes over the horizon. The duo leaves the fortress city behind and keeps on trekking until they finally reach the gates of a whole new town. 2 travelers walk into a wooden 2-story hotel in the middle of the city and ask the owner if he's got 2 spare rooms for them. Suddenly, Clarice just acts without thinking and grabs Mars by the sleeve to try and start a conversation. Blushing like crazy, his companion actually asks if they can share a room for the night. She looks him right in the eye and says the beds are separate, so it's not a big deal, but he's totally losing his mind over her offer. A bit later, the crew is back at their rental, but even though they're on separate beds, the vibe is still totally awkward. Our hero tries to kill the awkward vibes by telling his girl to hit the shower first, but she says she's already been in there forever and insists that Mars goes instead. The guy starts arguing with Clarice, insisting he's a gentleman and she has to go first. But his girlfriend thinks guys who call themselves gentlemen are actually super sus. They both start cracking up, and just like that, all that awkward tension from being stuck in the same room totally melts away. Clarice is hiding in the bathroom when it finally hits her that she's actually sharing a room with Mars. But she blushes and tries to stay calm since they've at least got separate beds. She jumps up and insists they stay together because she's terrified of getting kidnapped again, plus sharing one room is way cheaper anyway. She finally slides into the hot tub to relax, and decides she wants to get way closer to our main guy, while he's back in the room just staring at that stone and waiting for her. The guy sees his crystal start to glow and totally freaks out, jumping straight out of bed because he knows if that stone is shining, his family has to be close by. He yells through the bathroom door that he's gotta head out for a bit because it looks like his family is right nearby. Clarice snaps out of her daze in the bathroom, stands up, and yells for her friend to wait up. He ignores his buddy and bolts out of the hotel, sprinting down the street in a random direction because he's sure a family member is there to pick him up, and he's dying to know. He spots his dad and brother standing right there. Their crystals are glowing too, and they look totally shocked. The man and the boy start sprinting toward him, and he rushes to meet them halfway before they all crash into a massive family hug. While hanging out at the tavern, Clarice introduces herself to her friend's family with her full name, and tells them she's super happy to finally meet them. The MC's dad introduces himself as Bryant, mentioning he's been reading all about the Traveler in his son's letters, while the kid sitting next to him reveals he's actually Mars's brother, Ike. The squad finally kicked back and got comfortable at the table. A bit later, the waiter finally brought out the food they ordered. It turned out to be a huge plate of delicious-looking. The couple is totally stuffing their faces with the meal the guy's dad bought them, while the dad just kicks back and sips a drink from a wooden mug. While they're digging into their food, the group starts swapping stories about all the wild stuff they survived, like that massive fire snake, the creepy demon forest, meeting Misha and Sasha, and that crazy auction. Zeke looks totally hyped and shocked all at once. He can't wrap his head around how these heroes survived so much on their own. Then he mentions his son is doing awesome and says After stuffing their faces, the crew piles into the family carriage, while the dad asks if they're sure they didn't leave any of their gear back at the tavern. Mars, his brother, and the girl from his travels huddle in the back of the cart, shouting that they've got everything they need as the driver grabs the reins and tells them it's finally time to head home. The cart rolls through the city gates as the heroes head across fields and bridges, finally reaching a massive castle covered in creepy shadows. Clarice and her family had been traveling for a long time, fighting off monsters the whole way, and after the girl with the bow totally crushed one, everyone started hyping her up. Every time they stopped, the young sorceress used her magic to heal the horse since it was totally worn out from the fast pace, and then they'd get right back on the road. The wagon was rolling across the plains when the massive city walls finally popped up, so the heroes headed inside and started cruising through the busy streets. The cart finally grinds to a halt, and a man tells the group they've finally made it to their destination. The duo hops out of the carriage in front of a massive 2-story house, where the guy explains they're visiting him and tells Clarice not to feel shy about being there. 2 travelers spotted a woman on her porch crying tears of pure joy, and right behind her was a little girl who looked just as excited. Mars and his friend were just hanging back from the house, but suddenly the guy bolts toward the woman at the door while she rushes out and screams his name. She pulls him into a massive hug, and as he buries his face in her chest, she blushes hard and tells him she's so glad he's finally home. The main guy, still holding her, says he's finally back and sorry for making her freak out, while a little girl hugs his legs from behind. The little girl is totally stoked her brother is back, and as he settles in, he can't believe how much she's grown up while he was away. The woman finally lets go of her son, claps her hands, and asks the girl watching them if she's Clarice, introducing herself as Mars's mom, Maria. The young sorceress gives a quick curtsy to introduce herself, and the hero's mom bows back, totally impressed by her amazing manners. As evening hits, the whole family gathers for dinner and raises a toast to celebrate Mars coming home and to let Plivis know they're hyped to see her. Our hero and his loyal partner, who actually left her whole family behind just to travel, sit at the head of the table, blushing as they raise their mugs to thank everyone for the warm. Dinner wraps up, but everyone is still at the table when the dad asks his wife to help Clarice get settled, and Clarice is super thankful when she agrees. Maria grins and warns her that the new sorceress is a total weirdo who's hard to handle at first. But things will get better, and the girl says she's totally... Suddenly, his sister walks right up to the main character's girlfriend and says she's stoked to meet her, while the girl leans her head on a bench near some travelers and says she feels... It's super clear Lena really likes Clarice, so they spend the whole day hanging out, having a blast in the bath, and finally crashing in bed together. Ike was totally buried in his books and barely said a word to their guest. Our main guy stayed busy helping his dad with work. They kept this up for a whole month until it just became... Count Carmel gives our hero a mission to clear the monsters out of the Almeria maze, and he's totally hyped to take it on with his partner and big brother. The crew finally hits Almeria and joins the long line to sign up for the maze. Out of nowhere, a giant twice their size stops the group and starts grilling the kid about his gear, asking how a brat like him got such a crazy weapon, or if he just straight up stole it. He's absolutely losing it over being called a thief, so he glares at them and yells that he and his partner actually found all their gear inside the maze's treasure chests. The guy stares in total shock, points a thumb at his chest, and dares the kid to prove he's actually got the skills to handle such an insane weapon. The crowd clears a path to form a fighting ring, where the challenger tells our hero that if he's too weak, he's taking all his gear. The fight starts and ends in a total flash as the kid lunges forward and smashes his sword right into the guy's face, knocking him out cold instantly. This guy is just lying there on the stone floor of the hallway. His arms are spread out wide. He's totally knocked out. His friends start walking up to him from behind. Everyone in the crowd clears out as a handsome guy walks through, acting way too calm while telling Mars and his brother it's been forever since they last met. And then he just casually asks how they're... The oldest Bryant brother gives the old man a polite greeting and says their dad sent them to clear out all the monsters in the maze. The crowd starts whispering, wondering if this kid is actually the Count's son, and they're not even shocked he wrecked that guy as he pulls out a document from his dad. An old friend of the Bryant family thanks the heroes for stepping up to clear the maze, and the crew just keeps it humble. Finally, the crew reaches the massive entrance to the maze, but as soon as they step inside, giant silver birds start diving from the ceiling to attack them. The brother warns them that these silver birds are actually D-rank monsters, so he tells the couple to gear up while the whole squad locks in and gets ready for a fight. The whole place turns into a total bloodbath as Ike starts skewering birds with his spear, Mars blasts monsters apart with magic, and Clarice snipes them down with her bow. The fight's finally over and the heroes are gasping for air, but then they spot a massive mountain of magic stones and start stressing because there's just no way they can carry all that loot. After surviving that crazy mess, the squad finally heads home, and the big brother says he'll talk to their dad about what to do with all that massive loot. Back at the house, the heroes explain what happened in the maze, but the boss says they have way too many magic stones to carry, so he suddenly decides they're going to buy a slave. Count Bryant drops a bombshell offer that leaves all three travelers completely stunned the moment they get back. The head of the Bryant house leads his crew to a slave market, where the dealer asks if they need a strong, fast worker to carry their gear, and then shows them a candidate. Once the seller hears that the dad is actually down with the deal, he tells them to follow him. Crowds are just hanging out in this massive 3-story hall packed with animal people, and the guys are totally blown away because they've never seen anything like it. The slaves lean over the railings outside their rooms, keeping a sharp eye on the group of 4 people who just arrived. The dad notices everyone giving them the side eye, and the seller explains it's because these Beastmen don't bow down to anyone, which is why they look so annoyed. The squad walks up to a massive door with 2 weird slits in it. One guy notices that every room is a totally different size, and our hero creeps forward to peek through a tiny crack. Mars peeks inside and spots a blonde guy just chilling on the rug, leaning back on a lion with a tiny bow on his ear. This friendly guy is actually Duke Sarence, one of the 12 dukes from the Old Alliance and the main rep for the Beastmen. The seller says this guy was kicked out during a massive takeover and Count Carmel sold him for a fortune, but even though he was bought, the Duke refuses to follow anyone weaker than himself. He keeps staring at the Duke who's just chilling there, so he activates his heavenly eye to see every single move the guy could make. The Beastman rep notices he's being watched and he's totally not into it, so he storms over to the door and takes a massive swing that catches our hero completely off guard. The Duke's punch is so insane that he shatters the door to his cell, sending the kid flying back through a cloud of splinters. He realizes he's got to protect his people, so while he's flying, he uses his magic to push his family, girlfriend, and the merchant away from that angry guy. While our hero keeps making his escape, the Duke starts walking out looking totally on edge, and at that exact moment, the guy finally activates his crazy future-seeing powers. Once the magic hits, he sees that hand flying right at his face, and since there's no way he can dodge, he just braces for the impact. But then his girlfriend jumps. This exiled Beastman starts smashing the girl's shield with his bare fists, and the guy knows that if he takes a hit now, his friend is totally done for. With the barrier finally smashed, he unleashes his magic like a bolt of lightning that rips through his enemy's fist and surges through their whole body. Everyone's jaw drops seeing a young kid use magic this powerful, from the cellar to the slaves watching the massacre, but the Duke, who's already under a spell, is the one most blown away by it. He stares at his hands in total shock since he's never used magic like this before. But it definitely looks like lightning. While the Duke looks down at his own hand, which is scorched and shaking like crazy. He's gasping for air after burning through way too much magic, and he demands to know why the guy just jumped him out of nowhere. The Beastman rep stares his opponent down and says he only tried to scare him because he caught him peeking at his skills, leaving the guy looking totally confused. He clenches his fists as he's called out for snooping on the slave without asking, and feeling totally ashamed, he drops into a perfect 90-degree bow to apologize. Still bowing, the guy introduces himself with his full name, and as the Duke tries to head back to his room, he stops him to ask for his name too. The guy introduces himself as Leo Burns, and after a quick chat, he asks one more time if he can use the assessment skill. The Duke just shrugs and says he doesn't. The Duke stops right in front of him like he's showing off, and our guy is absolutely stunned by how insane his strength and flexibility stats really are. With a totally blank face, the Beastman rep asks if he's finally done using that ability reading spell. Mars tells the Duke he just battled that they're actually hunting for a slave, then he just stands there waiting for an answer. The man glares back at the kid, snapping that he doesn't take orders from anyone weaker than him, and he's not leaving without his pet. Seren says that after that insane fight, the guy might be looking for a different host, and suddenly voices start shouting from every direction. The other slaves watching from their floors are totally hyped, calling him absolute fire and begging him to be their master, which brings a big smile to his face. Our hero looks up and shouts a question to the crowd of slaves. Looking at their faces, it's obvious they're totally on his side. The merchant watches the whole scene go. The big boss of the Bryant family, who's also our hero's dad, checks to see if the guys are hurt, but they tell him they didn't even take a scratch. The buyers at this Beastman market are only picking out 5 slaves they actually like, and standing right in front of them are the Black Wolf brothers, Mac, Guy, and the youngest, Oru. 2 girls named Ray and Misha get picked alongside the guys, and Misha gives a polite bow as they both say they're stoked to help the group. The brothers' dad stands in front of the slaves picked for housework and jewel picking, telling them all to follow them. The group pulls up to a massive 3-story house that Zeke Bryant rented out to hold all the new people they recruited for their ministry. They walk into this massive building and find themselves in a giant dining hall, where the count tells them to eat up before they even think about work. So everyone takes a seat at a huge table. This girl with short black pigtails asks her new master if servants are actually allowed to eat at the same table. But someone nearby asks why she'd even think they shouldn't eat together. She suddenly jumps up and points right at one of the Beastman brothers, scolding Tom for being disrespectful, which totally shocks him into quickly agreeing with her. The head of the Bryant family just watches with a smile, telling everyone it's all good since the new servants aren't doing anything wrong. The dad tells his oldest son to handle the slave training tomorrow, and the guy is super pumped to get started. Once the heroes and Beastmen finish their meal, the main character's dad says it's time to get down to business and discuss the slaves' new jobs. The guy kicks things off with the house's #1 rule: slaves can never lay a finger on their masters, and Zeke adds that they're moving out in 3 years. The boss says that once the big event is over, he's dragging 3 Beastmen guys down to the dungeons while the girls stay behind to work at the mansion. Once dinner was over, everyone scattered through the mansion Count Bryant was renting and headed to their rooms with the roommates they'd already picked out. Even though it's late, the lights are still blazing in that 3-story house as the dad announces that the big prep starts tomorrow. The 3 Beastman brothers hit up the guild to lock in their E-rank status, and the second they stepped outside, they started flexing their new titles to everyone. The dark-haired guys rush over to Ike all hyped up and ask what's next, but he tells them he'll give them orders once he sees what they can actually do. The oldest Bryant son drags the slaves back to that same maze and orders them to start taking out every monster in sight. The slaves from the trading house had to face off against some super tough stone lizards, but the House of Brian's servants are definitely no joke. Without wasting a second, the brothers charge straight into the fight and leave their masters behind, with Mimirak looking totally blank while Guy has a massive grin on his face. With 3 shelled monsters in front of them, everyone picks a target and gets into their fighting stance. One guy sprints right up to the monster, digs his heels in, and delivers a sharp smack straight to the lizard's snout. While the kid is out cold, the guy brags that one lucky hit doesn't decide the fight, and now his brother is stepping up to deliver a massive kick. The middle brother leaps up and kicks the lizard right between the eyes, but the impact is so crazy that his shoe and part of his pants go flying. Aoru is the youngest Beastman there, but he grabs the monster's neck and squeezes it so hard that the thing actually passes out. Once the stone lizard fight wraps up, the brothers limp over to the hero, his brother, and his girlfriend, with Oru clutching his injured back and Max standing there with only one shoe left. A bit later, the Beastmen line up to report their total victory, looking super hyped because they barely got a scratch while crushing the competition. These 3 E-rank rookies are standing right in front of their masters, asking if they actually did a good job because they're dying to get some praise. The main character's big brother grins while gripping his weapon, but he's actually complaining that they couldn't even handle such an easy mission. The Beastmen are totally ticked off because they thought they crushed it, so the oldest brother asks the master why he thinks they failed. He looks at his brother and friend, telling them they need to get patched up first because that's exactly what travelers do before answering the slaves' questions. The girl walks up to the brothers and starts with the oldest, using her magic to heal all the damage from that crazy fight with the stone lizards. Aru, the youngest of the bunch, thinks the girl is super cool for using sacred magic, and since he heard her owners grow up way too fast, he's dying to know her real age. A duo from Clarice and Mars tells the brothers at the exact same time that they're only 8 years old, leaving the slaves looking completely blown away. The oldest brother asks the MC's girlfriend if her curves are from using holy magic, so the other guys tackle Gay and start beating him up for saying something so out of line. The younger beast guys bow low and apologize to Clarice, forcing the old man to do the same, but she just tells them it's all good. He clears his throat and tells the slaves that since they're finally healthy, it's time to go over every single mistake they made during the fight. The kid steps out, leaving his family and the Beastman behind, gets into a battle stance with his spear over his head, and tells everyone to keep their eyes glued to him. He pulls a total fake out and blasts fire right from his hand, blinding the monsters so badly they completely lose track of where they are. The fire keeps roasting those stone lizards, and just a second later, a guy's spear slams right through one of their necks. With the first monster down, he charges the next one and slices its head right off, then turns to the slaves and asks if they finally get what they did wrong. The oldest brother just waves his hand with a nervous laugh, telling them straight up that they don't even know how to use sacred magic. This makes the oldest Bryant son lose his mind. He totally missed the point of what the owner was trying to say. He starts yelling that their whole deal isn't about magic, He remembers the brothers' fight and spots their mistakes, realizing they're using way too much force and will probably just get hurt and fail the maze. The crew hangs on every word of their young master's orders until he finishes with Es Rui Laswa, a signal that the plan is set, and it's time for the brothers to fight side by side. He calls over a massive grizzly bear to make sure the slaves understood him perfectly so they can finish the job without anyone getting hurt. This bear is a total tank, but right as he swings his massive paw, his big brother swats it down, giving Oru the perfect opening to lunge in and pin the beast to the ground. To seal the win for the Beastmen, the middle brother launches himself high into the sky. Benz's leg comes crashing down right on the grizzly's head. That massive blow finally takes The relatives stand back to admire the mess they made, then turn to their young master to ask if he's enjoying the show, and if they did a good enough job. He flashes a thumbs up to show he's impressed with their skills, and the Beastmen are totally hyped to get his approval. The squad heads deeper down the hall until someone shouts that they've got to clear the second floor of monsters before they can finally go home. The second those guys and their slaves hit the next floor, everyone just freezes with their jaws dropped at the nightmare in front of them, and honestly, none of the adventurers have any clue what's even happening. The youngest Bryant kid didn't expect this many bugs on the second floor, but once he saw the massive swarm of ants, he knew he had to alert the guild before things got out. 2 brothers barge in on the guild leader with some urgent news, so he stops what he's doing and asks what the big deal is. He introduces the guy as Margrave Evan Satorum, and the mustachioed old man says he's stoked to finally meet Mars and me. The talk barely started before a council family friend leaned in, totally impatient, and told these random guests to quit stalling and spill the news. The guy reports that the second floor is crawling with bug monsters, and the guildmaster jumps up asking if they're killer ants, which totally catches the 2 rookies off guard. The guy keeps shouting that these monsters eat literally everything in sight. Since they're eating so much, they're multiplying like crazy. They're supposed to be in the forest of... The old man grumbles that if the ants keep growing in number, the maze is going to run out of food, and he looks down totally stressed because he has no clue how to handle it. Minutes crawl by in a super awkward silence while the brothers, the guild leader, and that old man who knows the Count's friend just sit there without saying a single word. Suddenly, he looks up and asks Mars and his big brother what they'd do in his shoes, making them both stop and think. But then the younger kid looks up and says he would have called in 3 squads from the Urguzia, Brown Shield, Blue Fangs, and Red Wings groups. He says he'll talk those Beastmen slaves into joining his squad, grab the strongest adventurers in town, and build a mini-army to take down the monsters. Sitting there with his brother and 2 older guys, the kid keeps explaining his plan, telling them that everything he said so far was just the warm-up for the most important part. Our hero looks ahead with total confidence and tells them they absolutely need Mr. Burns in the squad, the same guy he spotted back at that slave market. This kid's speech actually fires everyone up, and these grown men leap from their seats as he shouts that they can't ever quit and have to give it their all until the very end. After hearing the Beastman was way too strong for anyone to handle, Ralph agreed to the plan and ordered his men to get a hold of Count Bryant immediately. Bright and early the next morning, the whole army the guy called for finally gathers, and the MC's parents stand right at the front telling everyone it's time to move out. Groups from the Brown Shield, Blue Fangs, and Red Wings all crowded into one room. Mars is watching the whole thing with his best friend and his brother right next to him. Their dad, Evan, says almost all the Beastman slaves are ready to wipe out those giant ant monsters, but the Count is annoyed because he couldn't even get a word in with Burns. The man looks our hero dead in the eye and says the guy with the lion sent him to talk him into joining their big plan. A little while later, the guy is already standing at Burns' open cell door, looking down at him and saying he never thought he'd see his face again.